Yo. So quick, quick, quick react to our video, I guess. I said I would watch it, so here it is. It's the whole interview by ZiggyD, Nguyen, and IceQT of Roy and Jonathan, game designer and game director for PoE 2. So let's go.
SQT and Nguyen to chat to developers Rory and Jonathan.
One sec.
Hello, folks. Ziggy D here. Welcome back, Exiles. We are joined by RiseQT and Nguyen to chat to developers Rory and Jonathan from Grind Gear Games today. Thanks for joining us once again, folks.
No problem.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Very excited to see you guys doing so much kind of pre-PoE 2 beta discussions with everyone here. Answering so many questions. I've been hearing like a lot of stuff I'm really excited about too, like quality of life and visual improvements and access to content and things. So it's good. It's good.
Awesome.
So we have a lot of interesting questions today, and we're going to jump straight into them if that's all right with you fine folks.
Right.
And I've been curious about, so it was originally announced that the Path of Exile 1 and 2 endgames would be combined and would be a joined thing. Now that we've had the announcement that the two games are separate, what is exactly the plan for endgame now?
So we aren't yet announcing the full plan, but we have got a design. The overall kind of like, I guess like approach is very similar to what we're doing now, as far as like it's going to have maps in it, right? Like that's the main thing. But like the specifics, I want to be quite different. Like I want it to feel quite different than how it felt before. Like so that we can do something that feels like it's an evolution. So yeah, we've got a plan for it. The end game is going to be in the beta, so you will get to experience that. We'll sort of announce it a little bit closer to when the beta is happening. But I guess like a lot of questions people have about like how much access to content will there be as far as like number of things to a map and all these kind of things. Like those are questions that we'll be announcing a little bit closer. But if you have any sort of more specific concerns about it, I'm happy to address them.
So they're not going to be a combined endgame at all now anymore, like that?
No, they're not. They're going to be separate. And I think that now that they're separate games, it just it just makes sense for them to be separate. And like all the bosses from campaign of PoE 2 will come in the end game in the end game as well, and that kind of stuff. So it'll just end up being quite different.
Yeah. So obviously like a whole bunch of different map bosses and things like that. But will we see a big divergence in like the structure of them? How we have like Atlas passive trees and things like that?
Well, I mean, sort of hard to sort of tread the line here of what to say about this, because yes, there are changes, but as I said, I think it will feel quite different while mechanically not removing anything that can currently be done, if you know what I mean. That's kind of at least what I'm trying to go for, if that's like enough of a hint, I guess, for you.
Yeah.
Which which I guess is what we've got here.
No, I get it, but I have to say I'm just like in love with the current endgame state of Path of Exile 1, so looking forward to seeing how you build
I'll tell you what, the thing that people do love about it is the fact that there are lots of different things you can do, and there's also the ability to choose what it is that you what it is that you want to do. And I think those are the philosophies that we want to make sure that we're retaining as much as possible, and even amplifying in the base system. Like I want to make sure that like that feeling of like, I can choose what type of content I'm doing is definitely a core part of what we're designing there.
All right, wonderful. Rise, can you take us away for the next question, mate?
Sure, I'll just read it off. Do you plan to change the high-end power level in PoE 2? Will you still be able to one-shot entire maps and Ubers, or do you want to scale everything back? GGG has been quite vague in answering this in the past, leaving many players confused about the direction of PoE 2's gameplay compared to PoE 1.
I mean, yeah, we never designed the PoE 1 Uber bosses to be one shot. That's not part of the core philosophy. Is how does this fight feel when it ends in half a second? But
of course,
yeah, there's definitely when we are looking towards all these bosses, even the campaign bosses, it's making sure that the challenge is intense for where you're planned to be and what your power level is and so on. And that does mean for many boss fights, when they're really epic, they're gonna last, and the boss is gonna push everything it can at you to try and take you on, and it's a challenge to beat it. And it's natural for characters' powers to grow, especially as they outgrow the content. So we can expect, because we give the players huge numbers of tools, they will find ways to use and abuse them to do crazy things. That's just part of the game, and as players raise the bar, we'll raise the bar for challenge as well.
I think people underestimate the degree to which like people learning the game has changed the ability for people to be good at the game. Like when PoE 2 comes out, there might be ways that are in there to be able to do that stuff that we don't know about. But like that's just by the nature of the fact that we tend to be very kind of like we give people a lot of tools, right? We give them also, and they're able to combine them in interesting ways. But like what I expect to happen is that at the start, people won't be able to do that level of power just because they haven't worked out the builds yet, if you know what I mean. Like, and so, and as that kind of like as that stuff is worked out over time, that stuff will then come. It's sort of like interesting. I've actually had a conversation with Mark quite a few times recently about like, well, why it felt like a few years ago the sort of exponentialness of PoE kind of like exploded a bit, and we kind of had a lot of discussions about like why is that the case, like what sort of happened, and it's kind of a combination of different factors, I think, that happened, which I guess is a bit of a non-answer. But some of it really is just people learning to understand, like optimizing, understanding how all of that stuff works to a degree that they can now do the kind of things that they can do, as well as us just adding stuff. Like it isn't entirely just power creep on our end; it's power creep on the players learning the game better too. So yeah, I suspect that things will get a bit of a reset just from the fact that all the mechanics are so different, all the skills and all that things work so differently. Or maybe someone will find something totally broken in the first day. I don't know, but my hope is that it will take a little while before the really interesting strategies kind of come together.
I feel like recent innovations in Path of Building alone have made my builds like 50% stronger.
It's very possible. It's very possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other interesting thing is how fast in PoE 2 do those kinds of tools become as good. I mean, I imagine it will be faster, right? Just because, like, you know, the underlying stuff is there. Yeah, sure, to some extent. Although there's mechanically a lot of things are changing under the hood, right? Like just like base things that you've been able to rely on a lot, you know, in terms of like just the base equations for how defenses work and things like that change a bit, and then that has large knock-on effects to the game. So, you know, like people will have to work out like what the repercussions of all that is again, I think. But I mean, at the same time, like I imagine the tools will be made quite quickly.
Yeah, the new game is going to be a
quite
new game.
Excited for that reset, right? Like, I am
absolutely.
Sure.
It's huge. Like, it's absolutely great to be able to just be like, okay, nothing is nothing is off the table for changes now. You know, like we are able to do whatever we think might need to be changed. We are able to look at it again. It is great.
And every time we change one of those mechanics, it results in 10 other systems having to be rethought. And then those 10 systems require 10 systems each to be rethought. So it changes a lot.
Like, I mean, we have definitely not fully explored the repercussions ourselves of all of the stuff that we've changed, for sure, right? Like, there will have to be a lot of more work in that stuff, I have no doubt.
It's kind of our job as well.
Absolutely.
Nuki, could you take us for this question, mate?
Sure. In the previous interview, you spoke about a difference in drops between, let's say, a novice and a very experienced player, being in like a factor of even thousands, say.
1,000.
Yeah. But with PoE 2, at least from what I can see, you tend to show that there is a bit of a flatter curve, if that makes sense, in terms of power gain.
I think
so. Do you just to like finish? Do you intend to force like the like this difference through other means, or will it be something that we will get later on, and maybe the gap will be like, let's say, smaller in the beginning because there is less potential for power?
Well, okay, so first of all, I wouldn't... The word force there, I think, kind of doesn't quite exactly...
Right.
Like, it's not like we're forcing this to happen. What I would say is that you have to have the ability to make your character better to a large degree. Otherwise, what do you even have, right?
Yeah.
Like, if the difference between
It's
a
the
good
base
player
of
and a
the
bad
game.
player is 10x, like, well, I mean, I don't think you've got enough of a game there. Like that. And the funny thing is 10x may even sound like a good thing if you're like to someone who isn't really kind of, I guess, being around the block with this stuff. Like it may feel like kind of, oh yeah, like a good player is 10 times faster. But the thing is that there's so many things that factor on top of it. Like you can have a 10 times difference in clear speed as just one element, and then you can have a 10 times difference in damage as well. And once you've got a 10 times difference in damage, that means that you can have like the person can do harder content. And of course, if they are going to multiply the content difficulty that they're going to be able to do in some way by 10x, they expect 10x rewards, or maybe they don't expect 10x, but they expect certainly a bump in rewards that is commensurate with the difficulty increase, right? And then
even just having done a map many times, you know the layout, you know which encounters you can rush it and
Yes.
which ones
Right,
you can
right.
hold
There's
back.
like
And that's another 10 times on top of those other things, so you quickly multiply to that 1,000.
Absolutely. Like getting to 1,000 is honestly like the challenge is not so much getting to 1,000. The challenge is not getting above 1,000. That is like the that is the hard part. And like PoE 1 is absolutely in the 100,000 times territory, I believe, right now. We're kind of looking at where we're kind of at as far as like where that is. And so that this is a scaling back. And I think that
Right.
people maybe hear 1,000 times and think that like yeah, like I think they get the wrong idea about that. So like that's going to change things. I think one of the other things I've seen on Reddit and so on as well recently is like the concern about like, does this mean I'm going to have to be using Magic Find gear and stuff like that? And I guess I did want to talk about that as well, because that is something that people have been worried about, I guess. And I actually had another conversation with Chris about this because I needed to kind of refresh my memory of like, so I literally said to Chris, like, Chris, I want you to pitch me from scratch again on why Magic Find gear is good. Because I need like I need a refresher course on this again, and it really comes down to like you need your game to have some axis of scaling that isn't just DPS. Like like having some other element, it just means that there's another factor to consider in your character build. And I guess that that's a thing that we do believe in, that it is important, which isn't to say like but it needs to be competitive, right? It cannot be the case that Magic Find should outcompete
everything
damage.
else.
Like you need to, there needs to be some balance there. But it's like it's another thing to optimize for. At the point when you have gotten your DPS to the point where you can take down anything,
Yeah,
having the ability to now I want to be able to do that at the same time as also having MF gear.
it's another strat that need to be balanced between each other. Like the same way that how much does a tier 1 res give you compared to a tier 1 like Fizz or something. These things needs to be balanced between each other, otherwise there is no point on picking one over the other. Like you just pick the one that's broken and you go with it. And Magic Find just adds more depth to the game, as long as it's not the only option.
Yeah, is like something that can add to that. So I think that's kind of the reason why it is important. If you don't have that, then like I mean, it's similar to the balance between damage and defenses, right? Like there's there's like a kind of triangle of factors you have to consider in your build. So it's just something to consider.
Why do you think
that's kind of the thing?
Why do you think Magic Find gear is unpopular amongst like vocal, at least a vocal minority in the community? Then,
I guess. That's an interesting question. I think it's a little bit to do with
its name.
Like, go on.
Doesn't
I think
give you
part of the reason is
like
that the way it scales at the moment
actual
in PoE1 is
power.
quite exponential. So a lot of Magic Find gear is a lot better than a little bit and a lot of damage. So the scaling we definitely want to make sure that doing low tier content with very high rarity gear is not better than doing high tier content with a bit of rarity gear.
Right. Yes, that is a very important factor.
that
Actually, yes,
too.
that's important. Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yep.
Do you have anything in mind how to do that?
Honestly, so this particular area, like we will have to go and revisit those equations and do stuff, but I have to say it's not something we've like yet done the balance for. I actually then also like, because there are all sorts of things deep in the dark recesses of the like drop code that like that exist that all have to be looked at again. Like the equation for the way that magic find gear has diminishing returns is like weird and nobody understands it. And like there's stuff going on there that I kind of need to really go back and dive into and have another have another look at. And I'm sure Rishi will there'll be long conversations with Rishi about exactly all the stuff that needs to happen here. But I need to actually honestly re-understand some of the reasons why some of that stuff exists in the first place again myself.
The
to really
spaghetti
get it. But
code.
yeah, Rory is completely correct that the
Like
main thing that has to be the
fucking
case is
Riot
it
with League
can't
of
be better to
Legends.
do lower tier content with MF gear than it is to do higher tier content without it. That is I think a very good guiding philosophy to make sure that it's right.
That moment is kind of
Feel
why
like
I love
it's-
these Q&As. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It also feels like it cheapens a little bit of the rest of the game, right? If you have all these cool bosses and you designed all this great end game, and a month ago people started MFing in like tier 7 maps, and you would
Yes, so
think that they
I
would
don't
use
like.
all that currency
Yes,
to
I
move
absolutely
on.
do
But
not like that. That is a mistake in how that was. That shouldn't be like that. So yeah, you're correct about that.
I mean, the
All
main
right, awesome.
problem is
I love it. So my next question.
the main problem is the league mechanic that overjuices everything, and so you want to be able to kill the mobs. That's why you play in lesser map. In like you don't play in tier 16 and shit. So you can kill shit and still benefit from the huge quant and rarity bonuses. That also has to do with the league mechanic, which is probably not gonna go core, so
Question then,
who
changing
cares?
topics a little bit, is about that weapon and passive tree swapping system that was previewed. So you get the ability to bind certain skills to certain weapons, and then even different passive trees to different weapons. What happens then if you do something like, say, you ignite an enemy with a tree and a weapon that's built for big ignite damage, and then you swap over to something that doesn't have that? Is the damage that you have scaled dynamically? Do you stop dealing that damage? So on, things like that?
So the only thing that Carrot doesn't snapshot, the thing that updates is your permanent effects. So if you swap, your auras will change effect. You can't turn on an aura in an aura spec and switch to a non-aura spec.
Right.
Same for minions. You can't turn on your permanent minions in one spec and then expect them to be as powerful as then your second set, which is just about having maximum spirit.
Which I believe I
curses.
might have incorrectly understood in previously. I'm not 100% sure I got that exactly right, because yeah, like in general, when you've got two weapon sets, you have two versions of the skill, but but for permanent effects, like things that are considered permanent, like minions, it does update when you change spec, but it's not only for permanent minions. Like a temporary minion will not change because a temporary minion, well,
It's
being temporary
temporary.
means that you. So there's like a little tricky detail here, but effectively, while you have a weapon swap, you have two versions of every skill on your character, and when like both of them exist at the same time, so they sort of independently can have their own balance. And like if you fire a fireball and then change over to another one, like that fireball still is the fireball you cast from your other weapon set, so it gets all the bonuses that other weapon set conveyed.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
if you have your totem bound to your first weapon set and you place that totem down, then switch to your second weapon set, it's still using the first weapon set's totem with all of its stats.
That's
and
really
benefits and things like
strong.
that. So there
Cool.
is a lot of like, yeah, you can have a curse
Damn.
set up as your second spec if you've got the right sort of passive layout to make the alt passives fit with it. So you can have like big curses in one set and then take the time to weapon swap and then start.
Yeah.
doing
That sounds
your thing.
Yeah, so
broken.
we're getting like the full power of both, basically. And so like I could do a big ignite on an enemy and then swap to a second setup that has an
Correct.
extra curse and then curse the enemy
Correct.
to scale that.
Correct. Yep.
Cool.
So there's also a
Yeah.
big focus on making sure that like if you decide that you want cold in one and fire in the other, the rewards should be significant for that to go
Yeah.
along with the fact that you could have had a curse as your second set.
Right. Like yes, you have like it's actually a different type of balance that we had to do before, because like there's a thing where we, like as Rory was just saying, we have to make sure that like now we have to consider like what could your other weapon set be and make sure that that those are like balanced with respect to each other, because like we wouldn't want it to be the case that like everyone just has an alternate.
I think they're gonna go back on that at some point in PoE2. because it's kind of like the weapon, like the stat stick weapon, where you used to be able to have like one weapon that was like completely useless in a dual wielding setup because your skill wouldn't be able to hit with it. So you have skills that require a sword or an axe to hit, like cleave, I think, or blade storm. And you used to be able to have a weapon like a mace in your second hand, and it wouldn't like hit. So because you can't like use the skill with it, and so you use the second weapon as a stat stick, and they changed it because it was too strong. It was better than um, regular dual wielding or one weapon and shield or two-hander, and so they had to change it. And that, like the whole weapon swap and shit, that sounds way too strong to be like left in the game like that. Like if you have a setup that's just buffing your other setup, it's gonna be stronger than any like double setup. Like if you have a fireball plus ice spear, or a fireball plus something that buffs your fireball, like the fireball plus buff fireball is gonna be better every fucking time. Unless they are more like immune to a certain type of damage mob. I think they are gonna have to change it at some point. Because it sounds too strong.
Like weapon set with curses, because you know, like it has to be that there's something like there's competitive options no matter what it is you choose to have as your alternate, even though they can be quite a different build.
Yeah, same goes for weapons. Like if you're about applying stuns with maces in one set, then using swapping to your weapon set for your second thing needs to be able to take advantage of those stuns in a significant way to make it rewarding to be using two different weapon types rather than just having two different, slightly different flavored maces.
For sure.
Oh, that's way better than I expected. That's really awesome to hear. Sick.
Sounds like a balancing nightmare, though.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's pretty much our life at this point. So you know, like
Nice.
we would just why not make it, you know, 3 or 4 times harder to balance with every decision? Just whatever, you know, we'll just do it.
Why not, right?
Deal with it.
More things to nerf. Let's go.
Yeah. Sure. That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Rise has a question about Spirit. Take us away, Rise.
Wait, do I? Okay.
you do.
Can you talk more about Spirit and why you're moving away from mana reservation? Can you reserve HP with it?
Really the reason to move to Spirit is so that mana can matter more. It's about making mana cost the thing that more builds can care about and less of a afterthought or something that we balance around being something you can ignore.
Yeah, I mean, the original conversation literally was, what are we going to do to make mana actually matter? And then it's like, well, what's the big problem with mana? Oh, it's the reservation system. Let's see what we can do about that. And then everything, like it was one of those really nice design moments when, you know, and it's actually interesting because I believe, Rory, you'd actually come up with the system before.
Yeah, I'd
Like-
pitched it a couple of times for
Yeah. But then we sort of independently rediscovered it again, and then Rory was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's that same system I already came up with before now." And then when we started looking into that, it's like, okay, this actually solves like huge amounts of other problems. Like it became a thing. It's one of those awesome design moments where something happens, and then you're like, "Oh, this fixes like these problems as well, and these problems," and it turned into like a whole awesome thing. So we're really happy with that.
I mean, specifically when you're talking about reserving life, we're probably going to have a support gem that lowers the spirit cost of something slightly, but makes it reserve some life as well. So you've got that sort of things you can do with it, and we're going to have to come up with a bunch of cool supports that let you interact with spirit costs and spirit mechanics in ways that feel impactful.
There's something technically preventing reservation being a thing. We just have to be really of life and mana, that is, but we just have to be really careful that we don't accidentally make it again so that the most useful thing to do is that again, if you know what I mean. Like we want to make sure that you never get back into a position where everyone is reserving all their resources. Like it has to be that like that is not the default thing. Like that is a niche thing to do, because the normal thing to do is use your spirit bar. So that's just important. But there's nothing like we may revisit things. I mean, like you can. the mechanic is there for use on things like uniques or maybe support gems in some cases, or just certain other things. We just need to be careful with it.
All right.
You
I
can
bel-
get.
Go ahead.
It's like flat amounts of spirits, the spirit that you can get from quests and even killing
Yes, there
bosses,
is
right?
other sources, so it's on the tree as well. And yep, there's a couple of quests that give you a little bit, and
Amulet, I saw.
and yeah, and then things. Yes, amulet, exactly. There was things like that. So there's places you can get it, and of course the big one being the scepter for the kind of minion focused build is what you'll typically be wanting to use.
Oh yeah, because it's minion
Yugi
and
has a question
aura.
about defenses next. Thanks, Lane Yugi.
Mhm.
Of course I do.
Gotta build them.
Well, so you've been nerfing flasks and other things to that basically. Actually, let me just read the question. After the nerfs, the flask and the rebalance to armor evasion, the removal of dodge, multiple block nerfs. It seems that at an early stage, nowadays you demand either the use of determination or grace, either determination or
Suppression.
grace or
Spell
both,
suppression too.
and you kind of have to have a very high health pool or a spell suppression to not just get flat out one shot.
Yeah.
Which leaves the players in kind of an awkward situation where you either have these things or you just get run over quite fast when you're near sort of the endgame yellow red maps. Let's see here. So how do you feel about these changes to this? And are we going to see a similar thing in PoE 2?
Right. So I don't want to comment on the PoE 1 balance particularly because it is not my
Right.
expertise. Like Mark, if Mark was
Right.
here, he'd have a whole rant about that. However, what I will talk about is
Okay.
philosophy of a few things in PoE 2 with regard to this. So number one is it is not the case in PoE 2 that I would want every character to be running auras, right? Like that should not be the case.
What?
And another thing actually
Why?
around this is that in
Oh, defensive ones.
PoE 2, we're getting a little bit more strict again with the fact that gear is supposed to be adding flat things, and
Yeah.
the tree is supposed to be more multiplicative.
Okay.
and something like an aura also should be more multiplicative in general as well, I would hope, although we do need to discuss the specifics of those particular auras, which means that like something like determination and grace should not just be your one-stop shop to solve your defense problems. Like it should be that the items should matter a lot, and then you multiply what your items are doing with other sources, ideally.
Yeah, there's almost no way to get armor or evasion flat values outside of your gear pieces. You're not.
Oh.
There's almost nothing that
Okay.
you can just take to be like, I can't afford the gear. I'm using this unique, so I'll use just a random aura or
Yeah.
any mechanic really outside of gear.
But in general, your tree should be multiplicative. There was actually, I had a whole rant about this that I gave to the whole company at some point in recent times. I'm just trying to remember the specifics of now. But we were talking about there was kind of a concept that we discovered about like flat things are like I had a better word for this, but a sort of despecializing in a way, because when you add a flat thing to something like everyone gets closer to being the same when you add flat values on something. And multiplicative things are specializing because they mean that everyone, like the person who is already better gets even better than that. So we have to decide, like, from what sources do we want things to be specializing and from what sources do we want things to be despecializing. And the tree should be a specializing like thing. It should
Okay.
like, because the whole idea with the tree is that you're picking the things that are going to synergize well with what you're doing, right? Like it's supposed to be an
Sure.
amplifying force to specialize your character in a certain way. Whereas the items on your character can be despecializing. Like you can use
Why?
items to overcome issues that you have otherwise, but also you're just picking what you like. But in
But
both
it's
cases,
the
you're picking like what
base.
you want to do with your build. But it's like you actually want them to be
It's
to
not
have
the
different roles
item
to
in
make them feel like
itself.
different things. And then the question becomes support gems. Should they be a specializing or despecializing element of your build? And we came to the understanding that they should actually be something that is
Both.
despecializing, I believe is where we actually ended up. Because like the
What?
idea is that like you can use a support gem to overcome like to change what a skill, like if we want a support gem to change what a skill does,
They should be
if they were a
both.
specializing thing, it would mean that you like that would actually mean that you want to use a support gem, the same support gem with a given skill all the time, right? Because basically it would just be for a given support gem that this thing is best with that skill. So therefore, like, there's no real decisions at that point. It's just like, oh, I'm using this fireball. The best thing that goes with the fireball is this thing here because it has the most effect on it. Whereas if they're despecializing, they actually mean that you actually have choices there. So that was a non-obvious answer for that one. It's actually opposite of what you might initially think when you first see it. But this was a new way of thinking actually about things that I think that we sort of had, like, on some level we understood this intuitively, especially with the tree and the way that items were, but it was not an explicit understanding that we had until we actually sort of broke it down a little bit there. And so that understanding kind of came to sort of guide the philosophy there. And this seems like it's getting way off the topic that we originally had here, but it does sort of matter a little bit because when you're looking at a skill,
Okay.
a skill should be I think should be more of a specializing thing, which is why something like an
Yeah.
aura then would imply that it should be multiplicative rather than flat. So that's like a whole long-winded answer about about how we get there. But what that means is, yes, grace determination should probably be multiplicative. So like, I'm interested to know whether or not you think that sort of logic there holds up over time. But yeah, that's the that's the whole thing.
This does mean something like the ignite support should be about making a skill that is bad at igniting better at igniting, rather than just further capping your ignite chance. For something
Exactly,
that's
because
already
yeah,
bad.
it's a way to use a skill in a new way you weren't using it before.
Right.
Yeah, whereas the tree is like, I'm specializing in ignite with what I'm doing. I need to multiply the value of my ignites.
I say the same for spirit reservations, where they are multiplying something. You've already focused on shocks, so using Herald of Thunder on your weapon will further take advantage of those shocks.
Right. Yep. All right. There you
I
go.
feel like that plays
Okay.
really well into one of my favorite things about PoE2, which is removing all the life from the passive tree. I feel like
Yes.
changes like this synergize super well.
Yep.
Such a good idea. I love it.
Yep.
Which again further makes the defenses on your gear and your defensive passives more important, because that
Yes.
is your
Yeah.
main axis of
Correct.
defense then.
Correct.
Would you want there to be an easier way to then specialize either into, say, let's say, on this playthrough I want to be evasion stacking, on this one I want to be block or armor, like where it's, because right now it seems very difficult to go, at least from an early stage, to say I want to just go block, unless you're like Necromancer that has like a cheap way of getting there. It very much is, you have your armor evasion, or would you rather have like certain classes would specialize, or should there be a broader range that you can choose from the start?
So block is one of those. I mean, because the idea with block is like that is a multiplicative defense that you get if you're willing to give up damage by sacrificing one of your hands.
Yeah, it's
So the reason why
layer.
block is kind of independent of those is because it's intended to be multiplicative with whatever else you're doing,
It's,
so that can
layer
be
of
the
the
decision
onion.
of, am I using my right, left, well, I guess whatever hand for defense, or am I using it for more offense? So that's kind of like where that ends up. So I don't know that I don't think block is early game should be your primary defense, because it is
Right.
the multiplicative thing on top of whatever your primary defense is. Yeah.
And it is a very strength-focused mechanic, even more so in PoE2.
Yeah, I guess it sort of is. I mean, like in all cases, whatever is on your offhand is going to be being more defensive.
Right.
Well, no, I shouldn't say that. What I should say is, in all cases, you can choose to use your offhand as defense or offense, right? So whatever class you are, there's options in your offhand that are going to cause that to be the case. So block is one of those, but they have to be multiplicative with what you're doing in order to make that choice meaningful. So yeah.
How does energy shield factor into this? Because you've removed life from the tree, but energy shield is a defense, but it kind of acts more like life than the other defenses.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Where are we at with that one, Rory?
It's definitely a thing of like how you recover energy shield is a significantly more controlled thing. We're not expecting passive energy shield regen all the time. It's not like life where you can just expect to get constant amounts of it back. It's a barrier and a buffer that is not reliable 100% of the time.
It's
without
more like
serious
one,
shenanigans
basically.
near it. But there's always serious shenanigans available.
But do we have flat energy shield on the tree?
No.
No, I didn't think so. Yes, I thought it was multiplicative, which it should be under that philosophy.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't have flat, so yeah, multiplicative there.
We expect ES might be a bit more controlled than it is currently, because I'd say in PoE 1 right now, it's pretty good to solve energy shield recovery through various means, leech and wicked ward and things like that.
I mean, chaos inoculation is definitely a source of endless discussion because of how it implies that it should be your one-stop shop for defense. But
Mm.
yeah, more discussions to
Under
come on that.
discussion. Got it. So following on from the topic of defenses, then is how do you feel about time to death from effective signal to actual death? Is this something
Right.
that will be changing substantially from PoE 1 to PoE 2?
So I guess there's a few elements of this to talk about. So the first one is obviously we want to make sure that signaling attacks should be always good, right? Like there have been failures in PoE 1 of that for sure. We want to improve that. We've kind of talked about that a bunch of times. The time to death in PoE 1 is probably too short, but I want to
Probably.
stress the fact that we're not going overboard with changing it. Like what I'm saying is we can multiply the time to death by 5 and go from 500 milliseconds to 2.5 seconds, and that's still fine. You know what I mean? Like it's a different situation. Like what we aren't going to be is a game where you have a big health pool and then someone grinds you down over 30 seconds. You know what I mean? Like recovery. Like we are still a game where your life changes quickly from one state to the other. Like, and really the buffer of like life resources either come from your flasks or other recovery mechanics that you have. Like your life pool will change a lot, right? It isn't going to be just a slow grind down.
Sure.
But
It will be much slower for it to go back to full when it's nearly empty. So being hit by a heavy hit from a boss is 1 or 2 seconds, if not significantly more, of like risky time.
Because the issue is that if it's like 5 milliseconds, like it can be right now, then there's literally no way to kill your player except by one shot,
Yeah.
which isn't good. So it needs to be higher, but like I wouldn't want people to think that that's going to be a long time. Like it is going to be short amounts of time, just not like literally milliseconds like it
Yeah.
can be at the moment, you know? Like it should be, yeah, there should be fast changes, but yeah. Hopefully that covers what you were kind of asking about.
Yeah, it seems like, and it makes sense with things like the flask changes and stuff like that, restricting availability of healing a little bit more, and what we've seen from the combat, that you would be heading in that direction, where
Right.
there's a little bit more time for you to capitalize on the fact that someone's taken some damage.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
not too long.
Yeah, I get it. We're talking about the difference from instant in current PoE
Yeah.
to, you know, a tenth of a second, which is a long time in the concept of an action RPG when you're
Right.
operating on reflex and
Sure.
stuff.
For sure,
I get it,
for
yeah. Rise has a question on gearing through the vendors.
To what extent will you be able to gear through the vendors during the DM and Gazi interview? It seemed like gold will be a large part of itemization, especially in like the end game with the new crafting changes and whatnot.
I would think to say that it's a large part is not really correct. Like it is a part, right? Like you should want to go to vendors and look at them. But I wouldn't say that. Like I mean, I would not imagine that like I don't think the primary source of the items in your character is going to be vendors. Like absolutely not. Like it's just something that honestly the main thing I think in early games it's going to help a lot with regard to improving, like filling up all the holes in your character. And then at end game you've got gambling as well, which is another thing you can do, which can be a thing. But once again, I think to say a large part would probably be overestimating the effect.
You'll get some good items from gambling at some point, but you're not being geared up by gold.
Right.
Oh, that's one of the concerns from that interview, and I was very excited to talk about things that I look forward to in PoE 2, but I wouldn't be myself if I wouldn't talk about one of the bigger concerns overall. And so far, I've heard really, really good things that I really, really like. But one of the big problems was the crafting and potentially the vendors, the gambling, because from the looks of it, we are going to be picking up a lot more bases and then attempting to use something like a Chaos Orb to remove something and add
Correct, you are.
something. So wouldn't gambling play into that pretty significantly? And like
I
having
mean,
to
it
pick
can
up a lot
definitely
of
come in.
items?
It can definitely come in. I think so. I think the fear you're talking about is like, oh, like people look at the like drifts of items on the ground in PoE 1 and then they're like, oh, if I had to pick all these up and look at them, then that would be bad. But I think
Right.
that like the context of that is I don't think you should have that fear. Like, yes, I want people picking up and identifying items, but it's not going to be the case that you're picking up like, you know, like hundreds of items per map and being like, I have to look at all of these every time, right? That is absolutely not going to be the case. Like, there are more item system changes we have to discuss that I think will illuminate this a lot in the future. But suffice to say, yes, it is an explicit goal to get items on the ground to matter a lot, right? We want the items on the ground to matter a lot more. 100% we do. But don't necessarily take that to mean that you're going to be spending your day identifying rares like and like after every map for like a freaking half an hour, right? Like it's absolutely not going to be the case of that. So I guess all I can say about that is don't worry. Like when we talk more about the way that item drops will work in PoE2, I think that will become more clear. And there are big changes there, like quite like changes that I think, like when I first pitched them to Chris, his first reaction was, "What the hell?" You know what I mean? Like, and then like when I sold him on, when I explained the reasoning, he's like, "Oh yeah, actually that's awesome." You know what I mean? Like that's a thing that's like yeah, there's stuff there. So we'll talk about that in the future, but it's quite different.
I don't want to say anything because I'll give something away.
Fair enough. And the thing with that as well is okay. So like it's funny as well because when I talk about major changes here, like to a player who doesn't understand PoE, it'll probably seem like the stupidest things, but it's like internally they matter a lot and like they'll change the feel of the game quite a lot. So it does matter a lot to get this exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Because that was absolutely. I looked at it very
It's a
much from
lot
the
of
PoE 1
nothing,
perspective,
though.
and
sure,
I'm not gonna
for
lie, I
sure.
was pretty concerned, especially in the case of like power creep,
Mhm.
that you used to pick up like one of something, and that felt okay. But now that you're picking up 1,000 of that one of something, and you're having to move it. So,
But that comes back to, by the way, the thing before about the 1000x thing. Like the reason why we even have that as a guiding star is because we want to make item rarity be able to improve your drops by 1,000 times without relying on quantity.
That's hard.
And that is hard, but that is what we have to do to be able to, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is where the 1000. So the conversation that even came up in the office, I mean, like when we were discussing this and why that even became a thing was because, yeah, like, okay, like, what is the maximum amount we want players to be able to scale their drops by, right? And then once we've got that number, how do we make it so you can do that with only rarity alone and not quantity, so that you don't end up with the drifts of items on the ground? So that is the challenge. Yeah. That is the thing the drop system has to be able to solve. And that is the reason why a number like 1,000 times needs to exist, so that we can work out what needs to happen internally to be able to make that happen, if you see what I'm saying. So yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. So that, I guess that might have been a bit less, there might have been less context for that number when I originally gave it than this is probably a better explanation of why that exists.
There's also like pack size is a multiplier at the moment that we want to have far less of a focus on, because it also disturbs the like combat composition of packs and things like that, where it's like the fight is designed, like each of those fights is sort of a pretty tight fight, and
right.
if suddenly there's 5 times as many casters doing the freezing thing on you, then you're not going to have a good time.
Right. So I mean, not which isn't to say there won't be any sources of pack size. There will need to be some, but it probably shouldn't get quite so out of control in some ways. But the thing is, you do want to feel like there's some, like, oh, this map is crazy, there's a bunch of shit in it. You need that too, but like there's still, but it can be a bit of off the wall right now.
With the
so
rarity, with the rarity thing, sorry, it almost sounds like you're pushing towards some sort of like rarity makes the quality of rares better or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, we can talk more about that later. But I mean, there's
Said too much.
We're probably saying too much already. So we'll
I'm getting close.
And the reason I don't want to talk too much about it is just because like there are a lot of specifics around this that we'll need that we need to get tested and working out correctly. Like it isn't done enough to be able to really talk about.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, there's stuff to do there for sure.
My imagination's running away.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I remember when Chris talked about that a lot. Like Chris used to talk about these smart systems, but not just. It kind of got implemented. It felt like for currency
Iced.
drops, where you get less of like the smaller currencies, and then whenever you do drop them, it's a stack, or like you get the better
For
ones.
ice
And I think a lot of
they-
PoE 1 players were expecting that eventually, sooner or later, it's going to happen for loot and even unique items, and you're going to have that effect of, what was at the time called smart loot, which I don't know if it's still the case. So
The
seeing
thing
that
that
for
Chris,
PoE2 would be
the
great.
thing that it was called smart drops, which from back in the D3 days, is something we very much don't want to do, which was tailoring the gear that drops to the character you're playing.
Yep.
Right.
And that we do not like.
No,
So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
kills the
I think
economy.
you might be thinking of times when Chris was talking about that stuff, and yeah, like we don't want to like we will never resort to that. Like we feel like it's important to have the feeling of like I found an item, but it's for someone else, and I'm going to trade it now, and like that.
Oh,
being
it's
a part
for
of the game
another
being
win.
important. So, like we will never
mean,
do that.
especially-
But what is important, yeah, is just making it effectively so that the stuff that drops is more valuable without it requiring us to multiply the number of things on the ground by 100 times.
Yep.
So yeah.
I mean, gold is kind of a way of doing the smart drops where you're then buying the item slots that you would want.
Yeah, so you can actually move a little bit of the way to do that, just because then you buy
That's
the
it.
stuff that's good for your character. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's not the majority of the
Yeah,
not
yeah,
the big
yeah,
focus, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always think about like PoE players would abuse this and it would make it super unfun, where everybody would play like Pathfinder because Pathfinder gets the most
Oh,
valued drops.
Yeah,
and
maybe,
now-
maybe, yeah, exactly.
Ah,
Oh no. No, man.
Yeah.
Noogie has a good follow up about crafting tools in Path of Exile 2.
well, let me actually like, flip the question, or just so the eternal. So you initially, for those who can remember, you introduced the orb that was called the Eternal Orb, and then you removed it, and now you reintroduced Hinokora's Lock,
Mhm.
which is essentially like the same thing.
Mhm.
So I was thinking, are there anything that you kind of regret with the PoE crafting system, or that you want changed in PoE 2, and why?
With the
Um,
exception of Harvest. Sorry.
Yeah,
So
let's
I
not
guess,
talk.
like-
I'm
you
mainly
gonna
talking
include it?
about like
I gue-
currency drops that you use to craft with.
Well,
And, like, the philosophy behind that.
there's a couple of things we could talk about here, because one of the big ones,
Mhm.
which we've already talked about how we're changing, is Chaos Orb,
Hmm.
and I think and Scouring. So like
What?
it's sort of amazing the degree to which those two items affected the way the game is, and
Mm.
honestly, the way the drops on the ground are, and all of that stuff like that. Like it took a long time for us to understand the fact that when an item can change completely in one currency item, it
It's just a base.
results in the only thing mattering about an item on the ground being the base type.
Yep.
And that's bad. And so that is like a
But
very
why?
important, like very important thing. So I absolutely regret how that was, but I don't think that there's a way we could have even understood that where we were back when we designed that originally. So it's kind of like, yeah, like it's hard to say that I regret it exactly, because that would imply like, oh, I just kind of screwed up and didn't have foresight. Like it really is, like it took a lot of, I guess, like design maturity to get to the point of understanding that. Yeah, I mean, like, when I look at something like Eternal, I don't think I regret Eternal at all either. I mean, I'm trying to think back to why it is we even removed it in the first place. Like, do you remember?
It was too
Like-
strong.
I think it was just another way of people getting perfect items more
Yep.
reliably, and we're
Yeah.
like, there's already a lot of ways to
But like, I mean,
edge towards that.
Hinokora's Lock is already like does bring that back, right? I mean, but the UXs of Hinokora's
It
Lock
does.
is better. But I mean, it's like, I don't know. I'd have to go back into the archives and work out what exactly was going through our heads at the time. But like, I mean, sure, like there's those, right? Those base ones matter a lot. And then when you look at like, you know, all the other crafting systems in PoE, I mean, on an individual basis, there are individual mistakes, sure, like where things like were too powerful or whatever. But I don't know that they quite have the same level of like importance that something like Chaos Orb and Scouring have in terms of affecting the whole game and the way the whole drops. So, like, I don't think that like anything that we've done in any of those other crafting systems really quite broke the drop system to the extent that those orbs did.
I do think we're now much more careful not to make sure that a league's currency or league special reward is not strictly better than a Chaos Orb. Like in every case, you would rather use this than a Chaos Orb to do
Right.
what Chaos Orb was intended to do.
Right.
like-
Yeah.
At least not without some severe restrictions
Right.
to it.
So you're saying you want to keep like the base currencies more relevant and the others to be more of a alternative rather than a replacement?
I don't know that that's the motivation. It really comes
Okay.
down to not breaking the drop system. That's like the key
Okay.
thing. And yes, it's nice if that is a nice thing to make sure of as well, because it's a nice secondary goal. But it really is the just don't break the drops, right? Like make make it still fun to find items is like really, really important. So yeah, I think that's kind of really the key element.
And do you intend items to become 100% perfect again in PoE 2?
No.
I mean, that should be hard, of course, but it will be able to happen. I mean, yeah, like at some level, like what's the point of the ability for something to exist if it never exists? Like it
I
should just be
mean-
very rare and hard, right? You know, like I don't.
Sure,
think-
but
I
you
do
could
not-
intend for something to be, say, like you get to the 99 percentile, but you're never really reaching like the perfect, like where
Right, I see what you
everything
mean.
locks
Sure, I mean, you
into
always
the...
want something to strive for, I guess, is the thing there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's honestly like
I mean, it'll be mathematically near impossible.
yes, it's mathematically
But it'll
never at some
happen.
point, but it'll
Right.
happen eventually. But you know, like the
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
But certainly, when you want there to be stuff to strive for, right? You absolutely want that. And I
Yeah.
mean, like there should be rares that you can strive for. You know, like the like the most amazing rare should be a thing that is hard to get. So you know, yeah, like there's stuff like that. The other thing as well. Well, no, actually, you know, I'm not going to go into that because that's more other stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about yet. But yeah,
It is also going to be that, like, if you have an item that's 95% of the way there, it should be that you keep working on that item rather than like, actually, let's just start from scratch because I've got a higher chance to like bring it from a base
Okay.
type back up to that point.
that
That's
can be dependent a
stupid.
little bit, I think, on the situation. That's more iffy of a philosophy, I think. But yeah, there's going to be a lot more to talk about items later for sure.
In current state of Path of Exile, the best items can't really drop because of the nature of things like influence modifiers and stuff like that that are only available through crafting. Is that something you'd be shifting away from with PoE2, I imagine?
I don't know that I've got a really like a fully thought through answer for that one.
I mean, there's just a lot of design space and league mechanics and
Yeah,
game rewards that only really works if you then add it onto an item you've already got or something
Yeah.
like that. So it's hard to say, nah, that'll never happen.
I mean, you the implication there is that the perfect item even exists in the sense that, like, I mean, clearly, I mean, items only are perfect in the sense of perfect for a given build, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
multiple axes of what can make a perfect item, and so, like, ideally, all of those influence mechanics and things are sort of changing the builds you can do, like making it so a different thing exists. Like all that. I guess what you're asking though there is like, should influence mechanics should they be more important from the ground than from crafting? I don't know quite the answer to that, but I guess we'll have to see when we get there.
From a different angle, I guess the drops that I enjoy the most these days are things like delve modifiers dropping and temple modifiers and fractured items that
Yep.
have like, I look at one of those items and I say, oh, this is a special item that I can do something with now.
Mhm.
Is-
Yes. Well, being able to say this is a thing I can do something with is absolutely an explicit goal of the new stuff, right? Like that and then that once again, that's the Chaos Orb change right there. Is like, here is an item that I could modify, as
Yeah.
opposed to this is a base type I throw away and I could just use any, I could just, you know, Scour, Alk, or Chaos or whatever it is that you're doing to just throws away everything about it. So yes, the key thing is basically when you look at an item, it should be, what could this turn into? You know, like what steps can I take to make this awesome is the primary thing you should be thinking about it.
Yeah, awesome.
Or is it just not good enough? Like there's not enough there to be good, you know, at all.
All right. Changing topic a little bit. I haven't really felt like I've heard much about transfigured gems and Vaal skills in Path of Exile 2. Are they like alternate types of skills like that going to be a thing?
I mean, it's absolutely been a thing during skill development that be like, oh, what if it did this completely different thing? And we're like, yeah, we're going to need to make a transfigured gem for that at some point.
So we'll need to work out exactly what the system for gaining them is and all that sort of stuff like that. But but actually Vaal skills and in particular work way better in a PoE2 skill context than they did in PoE1 because they would just be different gems. They wouldn't be they wouldn't be so actually probably the Vaal thing would probably be more like how transfigured gems are, where it's like there's a way to turn a gem into a Vaal skill, and then presumably because it can be a 6-link now, it actually makes more, and because you've got more skill slots that can be 6 links in particular, like the idea of a skill I use occasionally and have to charge up is way more relevant in PoE2 than it would be in PoE1. So like, I mean, we'll have to look at the exact stuff around that, but I think that the system overall, like the idea of that stuff, works way better now than it would have in the past.
I always feel like Val skills have been a little bit underexplored, perhaps, and it does seem like there's a
I-
lot of room there in PoE2.
Agree, and I think it's hard just due to the nature of the way that that the PoE1 skill system is. And
Yeah.
I think it can be a lot better in PoE2 for sure.
All right. Rise has a quality of life question for us. Love you, Rise.
I kind of want to follow up though first on
no,
the
do.
on transfigured gems. Do you feel like it was a success? From my perspective, it's like the greatest change ever to PoE. I know that it probably took quite a lot of effort, but are you guys happy with
It
the
is a
outcome and how the
success.
players received it?
Also a fan.
It is a success, and I think that it's nice to have a venue to just like, what if a skill just did some totally random other thing to explore? Like it's sort of easier to like explore a different balance option and a transfigured version of a gem than it is to modify the original gem. And that's kind of a nice element that we can just kind of do now. Like, and I think that just makes it easier. Like, it just sort of uncuffs you a little bit with regard to like being able to just design some different things. So I think that is very good. And we're gonna continue to make more transfigured gems for each expansion. Like just make a bunch of them, and throw them in there. I mean, like they're relatively easy to develop, so like there's really no reason not to like throw stuff like that in. So yeah, I think we'll do more of them for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely trickier in PoE2 where each of the skills are far more like handcrafted and all their stuff going on, but
Right.
that's too cool not to do.
No, we'll definitely be doing some stuff like that.
It does seem like
Interestingly,
PoE2's combat is much more like combo oriented, right?
Mhm.
So that
Sure.
is that why?
Yeah, that is why.
It's,
Mhm.
I mean, definitely plenty of opportunities of like, this has just changed the skills element, and that changes a lot about it because of all the factors
Mhm.
involved in each skill.
Mhm.
Cool.
I feel like it takes the reins off you guys a little bit too, because if a transfigured gem is a dud, no one really cares. But if like a core skill is a dud, everybody cares. Like, it's disappointing.
I mean, the like Mark was just saying, he's like, oh yeah, I'll just be ruthless. We'll just like cut 10 of them if we don't like what they're doing. Put 20 more in, like that kind of thing. Like
Hold
it's just that just like whatever. You can just go ham with it. So that's all good.
Yeah.
Alright,
Well,
jump back to you.
Yeah, okay. I'm still not asking my question. This is a different question then.
Okay.
When it comes to
All right,
because
man, come on.
Rory's here and Rory knows everything. So I have been getting this a lot about PoE2. Will people still be able to play one button builds? Because that's been happening a lot. It seems like everything's combining, but people are pretty concerned about will that still be a possibility?
I can't see a way that it would end up being more efficient than using your skills in a
Right.
clever way.
Okay. Yeah.
But laziness does
I
increase
am
efficiency.
sure there will be ways to do that, but I wouldn't say it's a goal of ours to preserve. But also, I'm like, hey, all of these like automation gems are cool. We should have a bunch more of those and things like that. And so like it kind of ends up just being that like the nature of the tools we give players will just kind of mean that will probably be possible. But I should hope it isn't more efficient than actually like doing more than that.
And yeah, we've got cast on dodge roll. You can dodge a roll around triggering your spells to do stuff, but you could be using that spirit for
Right.
something else.
do you
You could
remember-
be using more other
I remember there was
Wait, that's a real thing? You're not joking?
Oh yeah, it was brought.
Yes.
Someone
Yeah, yeah,
brought
we're
it up
doing
at
custom dodge roll.
XLCon, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were just like, oh yeah, let's implement it.
yeah, custom dodge roll the thing. But I remember there was a conversation between Mark and one of the other designers. I don't remember which one it was now, where they were like, "Oh, I just want to be able to have a one button build," and we were kind of like, "Okay," so like, and he's like, they were like, "Oh, I just want to use this skill," like they were saying, and we're like, "Okay, but what if you just but then you could get a bit more damage if you did this," and they were like, "Oh, well, I guess I could use that as well." Like, yeah, sure, I'll add that. So it'll be this, but then I'll just use this occasionally. And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, but then you could use this skill that would like combo this and like would increase your damage again." Like, "Oh yeah, okay, so you're right. I should add this one as well." And and pretty soon we had like 5 or 6 skills they were using, and it's like they talk themselves into having more. So I mean, if you present like things that will improve people's builds to them
The
one at a
right
time,
way.
they'll tend to want to add them, and then
Yeah.
pretty soon they're not using one button build anymore. So like yeah, it changes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I my hope is that you won't want to be a one button build because you'll feel enticed by the cool things you could be doing. So that's my hope. But yeah, I'm sure that one button builds will be.
I'm
be
more
And
fucking
we have sort of
balance
looking at these
nightmare.
builds and how they play together. So like, okay, the right combo here to do is like play it like a concerto piano where you've got 15 different keys you need to use in the right sequence of optimum damage. Like that's not going to be fun. It's
Right.
going to be like using the
Yeah.
skill when you see the situation has come up
Right.
to use the skill and thinking about when to use it.
The more interesting question to me is how good will the 0 button builds be? Like that's the question that I have. We still have to play around with that, I guess.
I'm formulating a bonus question here, so bear with me. So I'm mostly pretty excited about the idea of these various situational skills and combos and things like that. But Path of Exile 1 has given us a very good example of ways in which it can become unfun, and that is totems on melee builds. It feeling like a mandatory and annoying thing to use for various reasons, like
I
them dying and their
disagree.
placement and stuff like that.
Totems
I
are
think it's an
fine.
example of that kind of like bad comboing that makes it less fun but feels mandatory. Have you thought about that, discussed that, and how you might be avoiding that with PoE2's design?
Definitely avoiding stuff that is like, this is just a buff that you want to effectively keep up all the time, and sometimes it's annoying to keep up all the time, but it's just there all the time, is something we're trying to avoid as much as possible, especially because you can then weapon swap to like apply the buff and then go back. It becomes a chore. Much more a focus on the combo skills being like, and now they're open, so I'm going to do a 10 times damage freezing spell on them that will just nuke them.
Melee totems, partly, I think, like, because melee's not really that great in PoE 1, and so it's kind of like melee totems are part of the kind of like attempt to make that better, like at some point in the past, and so like I certainly will want PoE 2 to
You
have melee
need,
totems as
like-
well, but the way they work,
You need a side setup for your build that buff your main skill, and totems are fine in melee. Especially since they also work for non-melee skills, like the attack speed one, the protector. It works for range skill. So it's not even just a melee thing. You need to have like situational buffs, like I think it's good for the game to have like good side setup. Because otherwise, like you're just gonna end up with like empty sockets or just like 3 fucking custom damage taken setups and shit, and it's not fun. Like it's not like the game has like 10,000 buttons. Like you have like a movement skill, a guard skill, and then some buffs, you know. So if they remove the totems, then they're gonna have to add something else, which is like it's gonna be the same thing in terms of gameplay. So totems are fine, I think. As someone who plays like mainly melee skill, I've been playing Helix recently, but as someone who plays mainly melee, totems are completely fine. And they are like a good. They are not the best. Oh, they are the best in the sense that they are the least worst option for like a buff for melee, in my opinion. Like I thought about it, and I don't see a way where you make a buff for melee and for attack skill that's like better than totem. In my opinion. Because it's just gonna be like, oh, you press it, and then it just becomes a flask, you know. You press it, you have the buff and stuff. At least, like, totems are fun, in my opinion.
I mean, what
they're
makes them
almost
so annoying, right? Like, what is it really at the core
That's
of
the
what makes them
question, right?
annoying?
Like,
I think this is the
What's your take
I
on
mean,
that?
the main thing that it's got a huge damage buff, right? And you you
Yep.
might
It's
as well have that
mandatory.
huge damage boost,
That is
which is
definitely
almost
will
certainly
need-
gone.
That will definitely need to go, right? There should be no reason why that should give you a damage buff like that. In
Yeah,
fact,
like-
why was that even done in the first place?
I feel like them doing damage should be the damage buff, right? Like,
Yeah,
rather
of course,
than-
right?
yeah.
Well, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't it be, right? Obviously. So why was that damage buff even added? Why is that?
It's probably just because everything we gave Melee was some sort of buff to their thing if it wasn't.
But it was
already.
just kind of like an awkward ancient band-aid, I guess, at
I
this
don't
point.
remember why that would have even been added.
Might have just been to make them different from other totems. Just
Yeah.
wasn't done the right way.
So,
Yeah.
but did they have that when they were added?
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
The buff has been buffed at various
Great.
points.
The thing is, I feel I feel like maybe I'll even suggest this to Mark, but it's like we probably should just remove that and like make
Oh yeah,
them better,
I
right?
think we already have in the plans.
Oh,
for
and,
those
and yeah,
skills,
sure. But
nice.
what I meant wasn't even in PoE1, maybe I don't know. Like either way though, like that's
Right.
not up to me. That's a Mark question.
I
But
think that's
but go on.
I think that's not why they're like considered bad though. That's
But
the
no, I agree.
aggravating
The other
factor,
element is the having to recast them all the time, right? That's your
Yeah.
concern.
for sure.
It's not all
I
the
mean,
time.
it'll be an
Right.
optional playstyle if
You
you
don't
want to
cast
invest in
them
melee totems and
constantly in
focus on that
clearing.
stuff.
Yeah.
And probably also you're investing in stuff that makes it far more convenient to
But
keep them up.
Then the question
Exactly.
I have is, why is it not unfun to recast your spell totems?
Why is it? Wait, what?
Because the spell totems are doing your damage. Like they're the main thing you want to
As
do.
opposed to
right?
the melee totems,
As
which are
opposed
also doing the
to-
spell
damage,
totems.
right? So what you're saying is
Yes.
it might be fine to recast the spell the melee totems if they were actually doing damage to the monsters, as opposed
Yeah,
to
but
actually
then
do-
play a
totems.
damage
yeah, right, so
totem.
no, it really
Gwyn.
comes always back to the fact that they give you a damage boost, which makes them mandatory and makes it feel frustrating because you need to keep the damage boost up and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it all stems from that decision, I think. So I suspect, like, I have to admit, we haven't like prototyped melee totems in PoE2 again yet. Like, that's not a thing we've yet done. So therefore, we haven't kind of then meant what that means is that we haven't like, unless you am I wrong about that, Rory? Did we do it already?
It's technically functional. but we
Totems
haven't
are
played with it.
fine.
Yeah, sure. We haven't like had a whole like thing where we like, okay, let's get this in the right place kind of moment. Like yet, if you know what I mean. So what that means is that like it's hard to then answer the specifics, but I absolutely believe that yeah, it's going to be that damage bonus that's the primary part of why they suck. So
Yeah.
that can be improved in that way.
I think like even zooming out a little bit, it kind of
Mm-hmm.
extends to other things that are like a mandatory damage buff that have an inconsistent uptime.
Yeah,
Like because that's they're dying randomly to you as the player, and that's similar to like
Yep.
with a
Yep.
totem.
No, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that for sure.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
Okay.
Looking forward to seeing how you address that in the future. That was
sure.
a interesting topic.
Well, it
to
sounds like
explore
Rory
too.
was already on board with that.
Yeah,
we, just,
yeah.
honestly, we just haven't
Nice.
gone through we haven't gone through that together yet. It's not been a thing we've gone through, but it sounds like we know what's going on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Glad we thought to
do-
explore that. Go ahead, Nugi.
I do think it begs the question a little bit because you're talking so much about how you would always want to combo and use other skills.
Mhm.
And let's say that there is a specific playstyle or like an archetype, melee for instance, again, or other spellcasters where there's a combo piece
Yeah,
that
no,
you
I-
basically can never ignore. So
Yep,
how
I
do
understand what you mean. Yeah,
not?
it's a delicate balance, right?
Mhm.
The only solution is balancing it
Yes,
well, and
yeah.
having the alternative
right.
is good.
But I think that the
Or
interesting point
just
there is
make
that
it play well.
right, exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? It's the fact that the melee totems, when you're using them that way, don't feel entertaining to do. That is
Mhm.
that is part of that big issue, right? Because yeah, as we were just saying, right, like the melee totem might be a thing that, well, I would hope that nothing feels mandatory because ideally, there's enough variety and everything. That's not the case. But even if they did, at least if melee totems felt good to use, you could at least, that would be easier to deal with for sure.
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. fair
Now, Rise, if you don't ask your question, I'm going to skip it.
It's a total shift, but I'm asking, how do you feel about item pickup radius heading into PoE2? Would it be possible for PC players to get a pick up nearby items button like on console, considering we're now getting WASD movement?
So we just had an argument about this right before the podcast, and
Friendly argument.
friendly argument. yeah. I am of the opinion that we will need to increase pickup radius.
Okay, I'm gonna take a quick break, get another coffee and stuff. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. That was quick. And let's up.
How do you feel about item pickup radius heading into PoE 2? Would it be possible for PC players to get a pick up nearby items button like on console, considering we're now getting WASD movement?
So we just had an argument about this right before the podcast. And
Friendly argument.
friendly argument. Yeah. I am of the opinion that we will need to increase pickup radius. There is an argument for how much buy. There's an argument for by how much buy. One issue, of course,
10 years.
one issue, of course, is how do you indicate to the player that so with WSD, you don't want to have when you click on an item, you don't want your character to move to the item, right? You want it to
Yeah.
to stay still because obviously you're moving with WSD. So therefore, there has to be some kind of indication on the hover about whether or not you're in range to pick it up. And so one way to solve that is just to make the pickup radius the whole screen. But I kind of feel a bit sad about that for various reasons, which is
Also,
why I
careful.
kind of don't. I'm not really that keen. So we'll have to find a solution to that. It's actually not something we've solved yet. But it's something we have to do something about it. And that would of course also mean that various other factors relating to item pickups would hopefully get less annoying. And I mean, look, it's going to at least be large enough that like you'll be able to not stand in the ground fire when you will go to pick up your item. And that kind of thing. So it'll at least be large enough for that. But we still have to just make sure that we get that feeling kind of okay and working it out. I mean, the thing that came up as we were discussing this was like just related to the whole you should never move when you're not pressing WSD if you're in that mode. Is like, okay, so what happens if there's a lever and you need to, there has to be some amount of your character moves a little bit, because you can't, you're not going to stand in the exact pixel that's the exact point where you need to do the lever, right? So there has to be a little bit of that, but we have to work that out.
Yeah. Can you psychically open doors?
Yes. Well, then there's the next thing.
Yes.
Yes. Can you psychically open doors? I mean, obviously the increase. I would actually think we should increase the radius of that even a little bit as well.
Nice.
Because I think like not so much that it would feel like you're not walking up to the door to open it, but like at least enough so that it doesn't feel totally fiddly to be able to do that stuff. So yeah, there's things we'll have to do there, but yes, I do think that radius will have to increase a bit.
That sounds so good. And since you're kind of on this topic, how about when we talk to NPCs when we're like got a menu up and we're getting attacked and there's ground effects underneath them burning us while we're trying to shop in their in-game vendors and
we haven't made this change yet, but I am actually very keen to make it so that you don't have to be right next to an NPC to talk to them, like have the radius of that be increased as well. But there's a few other issues around that I need to talk to our UX
Personal
guy
space
around, because I think we can improve it, the way that feels. So yeah, stuff to do there. Yeah.
All right, good. Glad you're looking into that.
Just to be clear, so the argument was about the amount of range increase on the pickup radius, not whether or not it's a good idea to even have that increase in the first.
It will increase. The question is how much.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's Okay, what about a telekinesis button then, like in Diablo 2? You're just opening doors and picking stuff up, but you have to, click a button. Maybe it takes a long time.
Don't have it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That was too hopeful.
All right, moving away from the quality of life once again, going to Noogie. Question about borrowed power from League mechanics. I'm interested about this one.
Yeah, because we've seen it a lot. So just the 3 last leagues, it was weapon skill trees that then went away. Then it was tattoos that then went away, and now it's charms. Is it a trend that you see happening in PoE 2?
I think it's something we could that we will probably do for sure. Like
Tattoos should come back.
I mean it's nice to have like a way to kind of do a feeling of a little bit of power creep in a league without having to be committing to it sticking around is quite nice. So I think it's good to do that. But I mean, I'm not going to say that every league is going to always have something like that, but I do think I think it's a pretty good thing to do.
It's just a thin line to tread if it becomes permanent that you don't want to feel like, oh, now I have to do this league for this amount of time to fill up this slot in my
Right.
character and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right.
At the very least, making it far less like in every slot it multiplies it by a certain amount and
Right.
move on to the next league.
Yeah.
These are the reward structures I've been enjoying the most lately, for sure. Like, because they're the most interesting. Like, they inspire build creation. Like, Crucible
For sure,
Trees inspired build creation. This league is
Yeah.
nuts for that.
Yeah, it's great when you feel it. It's
Yeah,
great
yeah.
when you feel it.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So, with Path of Exile 2's enemies becoming tougher and more dangerous in more interesting ways now, can we expect a move away from lingering death effects, things that kill us after the monster is long gone and we're trying to click loot and whatnot?
Well, we did discuss the loot thing earlier, at least,
Mhm.
so that improves that situation. But I do think that death effects they have an important place, and it isn't so much for like you kill the last monster and then the monster kills you after. That's not really what the intention is. The intention is that when you're in a situation where you've got monster like multiple monsters, the lingering death effects of the other monsters are able to cause you to have to change what you're doing with regard to like how you're playing around that, and like knowing that a monster is going to leave a death effect afterwards like kind of can change a little bit of what you have to do for the remaining monsters or when you kill them and that kind of stuff. So I think the lingering death effects can like do actually have a use for that, and which is the reason why we wouldn't want to get rid of them. Before the call, Rory was suggesting like, should we remove lingering death effects like when the last monster dies, or something like that. I don't think I'm actually that keen for that because I think it's not very understandable. Like, I don't think it will make sense to the player, very much. But at least the loot pickup radius thing will mean that like that is not so frustrating to deal with. But I do think they do have a place. Like, it is important to have those things that can change the way combat feels like in the moment. Like something like you need to have it so that a mod on a monster pack can make it, can change things up. I guess the argument would be that like there's less of a reason to have that on things like rares because that's more likely to be the last thing you kill, which I guess is an argument. So we'll obviously look into that stuff more, I suppose. But it isn't a mechanic that's going away or anything like that.
I think it's interesting the idea of it like shaping combat as combat is going on, and it sounds like the reason to not kind of remove them after the combat is over is because that's difficult to communicate. Is there then potentially another solution to that so that you can do that instead, if that's the only reason to not?
If you have one, I'm open to it. So
We'll get our top minds on it.
Yeah,
Chat.
Yeah.
Interesting thing to explore potentially. Thanks for the insights. Rise, we have a question about respecking. Or do you have other questions maybe this time?
I mean, kind of. As a passionate hater of lingering effects, it mostly does boil down to DD for me. Because if I die to something like a burn and I'm not paying attention, and I go, "Oh, this was so stupid."
We've talked about DD already, and even PoE1's getting that changed. So
Yeah.
like that
Oh,
change.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, look, that just comes down to making sure that they're seeable before the damage occurs, right? Like, as long as that's the case, then that's obviously better. Yeah.
Okay, well, do you feel respecking in the early game should be as difficult in PoE 2 as it is in PoE 1, leaving it really open-ended here? Not suggesting anything.
I honestly sort of don't feel like it's too far off wrong, I have to say. Overall, on balance,
Okay.
on looking at it, I actually think it isn't too far off wrong. That's a pretty short answer, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, until we really spend a long time playing with the like at mid to high levels, you get the split passives, and how does that change how you experiment and that sort of thing? That might change the answer a bit, but it's hard to know until we really
Right.
really got our teeth into it.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far off wrong.
I mean, Diablo 4 tries something where it's like it's easy to respect early on, but it's harder as the game goes on. Like, as the game goes on, you're like, it's gonna be easier to make a new character, basically. So maybe that could be a good thing to check for PoE, especially if like there is a wave of completely new player. But yeah, they are really hostile to people like being able to respect freely in the game. In general.
Something Neon said in the previous interview with DM and Gazi was that's what rerolls are for. So I guess that's kind of like if you want to heavily respec, you just
To some
reroll.
extent, to some extent, yes.
Okay.
All right, Nuki, take us away for our next question.
Also in the past there have been issues that have seemed near impossible to fix, at least what you've said. So for instance, desync was for a very long time is you just have to deal with it. We can't fix it. Are there any things that now that seem possible to fix that might not have been in the past? Open question.
I mean, we've already made a huge number of like massive technical changes that sound subtle, like a frame taken away before a projectile is visible and things like that, that like compound to make the game feel so much more tight and so much more work involved in making it all like perfectly
I
fitting
mean,
together now.
You
but-
look at things like WASD, for example. That's the kind of thing that would have appeared to be on the too hard basket,
Yeah.
but you know, we managed it. Like we're trying to be as open-minded as possible with regard to what is fixable, and because ultimately the goal, as I hope it is with any game developer, is to make the game as close to perfect as we can. So I don't think that the attitude of like this is impossible to fix is one that I want to have around generally. You know, like it needs to be like, like it always needs to be like, yes,
What can you
there is
do?
going to be a way, like there will be a way to address this. And so I'm trying to think if there's anything like to answer this question, I guess I'd want to hear an example of something that seems impossible to fix, so then I can kind of think about it. You know what I mean? Like, what's an
Devlogs.
impossible to fix problem? And then we can see whether or not it's possible. Because as I said, I try to kind of always think like, well, we can. You know, as
I mean, I
sort
think
of
a good
overall-
example was actually the pickup radius, because that did seem as if it's something, no, we can't really do anything about it. And that seemed to be kind of the answer we got for a long time. So that was like very surprising to me, at least.
Right.
Oh,
Well,
death
because
logs and
it's-
damage recaps.
Yep.
It's not like that's impossible to fix as such, right? It's not like a technical challenge. Like desync is a technical challenge, right? Like it's we just
Right.
have to deal with this. Whereas pickup radius is just like, well, we could increase that number any time. It's a question of are we actually like the problems that like what you're okay when you're looking at something like that, what are we concerned about? Well, it's sort of like one of those game feel things of like, you know, just making the like the problem of that is a more nebulous problem of like
Right.
item weight. Like, does it feel like you're actually in a
It's a
world like you just have
perception
mystical power? Like, you know, like the more sort of
And so
like
it's
mystical
relative
powers of like, you know,
to people.
that break the kind of like world feel you do, the further away you get from this feeling of like that the world is actually physical and real and that it's serious and this kind of stuff, right? And so it's like on some level, I think that
It's funny that they say that when you can literally jump over a closed door, like there is the door, there is the wall, there is the like door frame. The door is closed, but your character can jump between the door and the door frame when the door is closed. And then they talk about like realism, which is really funny, you know?
it's important to reevaluate those sometimes, which is what the pickup radius change is about. And like it, but at the same time, if you just go too far with that, you can make the game feel like it doesn't really have the same importance and weight that it had before. And it's like it's really hard, I guess, for people to accept those kinds of arguments because no one change is the thing that does that. It's the collection of everything together that somehow makes the game feel real. And like so whenever we're making that kind of argument, it's honestly, it's like I think this is the kind of arguments that game developers hate having to have with their audience, because like yeah, you're right, like the game would be better if the pickup radius was larger, right? Of course, like that would be easier, like your game, like, you know, that sort of like it's like, and then on the other side of that argument, it's like some freaking nebulous thing about game feel that like, oh, well, what the hell are you even talking about? You know, like I mean, like it's hard to even it's really hard to balance that, but yet it's like
It's an
yeah,
uphill
it's just one of those
battle.
slippery slope things. yeah, I don't know. That isn't really answering anything, I guess, on some level. But I guess what I'm just trying to talk about is just the tension that game developers have with their audience is often around these type of things, where it's like, well, yeah, obviously we
Yeah.
could do that, right? There is nothing stopping us from making that change. Why aren't you? Well, that's a very hard question to answer, right? Like, yeah,
Obviously, I could give you a headhunter. It would be great for you.
yes,
Your
yeah,
game
of
would
course,
be much
right?
more
Yes,
fun,
absolutely.
right?
We could
Why
be
wouldn't we?
headhunters for all is a possible thing, right? We can go to the database, import headhunters for all. Why not do that, right? Why do we not just do it? You know, so yeah,
mean, it kinda-
these are the hardest questions to always answer. Why are you not giving me the exact thing I want? Yeah,
Kind of like
it's hard to. Yeah, I don't know. for reasons that it would make the game worse in some way that's hard to quantify. Yeah, I guess that's all we can say about that.
PoE 2 seems like an amalgamation of that altogether. It's just kind of okay. Let's just make another game
yeah.
altogether instead of
Sure,
continuing.
yeah, for sure.
Something I never
That's all
expected
good.
to see was the ability to pause the game in single player. And as someone who
Mhm.
recently became a father, I'm super excited about that and very interested
Yes,
in some of the
yes.
specifics. So you were
You know,
talking. Go
pause
ahead.
is absolutely one of those things where, like, I think exactly one of those things where it's like,
Yeah.
it seems impossible for reasons that aren't exactly real. It's just like, well, you know, we're a multiplayer game, we're kind of pausing, and it's like when you really like, if you come into that with the question of, well, what if we just stopped making excuses? You know, like what if we actually just didn't have that excuse and then we actually took it seriously? And it's like, well, yeah, I guess we could do it. And then at that
Love
point,
it.
it's like, well, yeah, I guess, you know, like yeah, I guess we can do it. You know what I mean? Like that it is just really that, I guess.
I need to ask
Yeah.
myself that sometimes. What if I just stopped making excuses?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So some of the specifics on that I'm pretty interested in, and I saw a question in chat just now actually. So could you have something like pause on disconnect, or is there a reason that's not a good idea?
Well, the instance does pause on disconnect if you're in single player.
Hmm.
Wow.
Like,
Whoa,
That's
automatically
nice.
disconnect, or is that just in that time lag there? Is it?
Well, hang on.
After
Well, hang on.
6
Hang on.
seconds, it
to be clear,
activates?
though,
Hold on.
Right. Okay. So just okay.
You guys don't know that?
When I say disconnect, what I mean is when the server determines you have disconnected.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lag
Because
there.
like we don't know you're disconnected until that happens, right? So the
Yeah.
question is like it is impossible to understand like is this lag or is this a disconnect?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's a that's the thing. So you know, this is an interesting question, not one that I have considered before, but like. No, okay. So here's the thing, right? You can always simulate lag
Hmm.
on the client, so therefore
Yeah.
we have to very carefully think what could a cheat possibly do
Lag switch.
if
yeah.
they have the ability, you know. So I just have to think about that. But I guess since the client can pause the game anyway, you know, why couldn't we?
Oh.
Yeah, why couldn't
If,
you?
if the client hasn't sent a packet to the server for some very short amount of time, pause the instance in single player.
Oh.
Hold up.
Is there a reason we couldn't do that? Let me just think
Let him
about
cook.
this. Let me just think about this. So, what could a cheat? Because you can pause the game anyway. So, if the client is capable of pausing the game at any time, then I don't see a reason why we couldn't pause the server if you're lagging. I don't see a reason why we couldn't do that in single player.
I mean, you can pause at any time by hitting the escape key.
Yes, that's what I mean.
So
You can
there's
do
no
that. So there
advantage
really
to
is
it.
no reason why we couldn't do that.
Oh, the
I think-
follow-on
I
question.
remember that was like a giant point of contention because obviously a lot of hardcore players
Yeah,
are
yeah, no,
listening
for
to
sure,
this
for
and
sure.
literally,
For sure.
yeah,
That would actually be a fix to the hardcore lag death problem.
Yes.
Wow.
yeah. Because
I
I
will-
remember when Shaper
yeah,
used
yeah.
to pause the entire game, a lot of people brought that up, and there were some interviews with Chris where it was a little bit unclear because it did seem like you guys were able to slow down the game or stop it altogether pretty much immediately when that was recognized, but then it was never and people use that as an argument for the 6-second timer, and what
The
I'm hearing right
argument-
now is really good. I really like it.
In multiplayer, it has to be that way. We can't pause the
Mhm.
instance in multiplayer, of course,
Sure.
right?
Right.
And we still can't tell the
yeah.
difference between lag and not, and like getting disconnected is no fun when you just have a 1 second lag spike when you don't even know that you normally had it. Like this kind of thing sucks, right? There's a reason why you want to have the timer be some amount more than instant, you know. But
Yep.
yes, we could in single player because if you're not getting disconnected, certainly leaves much of an issue. So yeah, there is actually a world where we could pause the instance in single player. Yep. No. Okay. Well, I will look into that. That could
Yeah.
be a thing.
Obviously,
I will look
like
into that.
temper expectations a bit because, like, I imagine you have to explore the nuances.
Yeah,
of this
yeah,
and
yeah.
whether
But
there's any
I
technical
but I don't
limitations.
immediately see a reason. I don't.
Opium overload.
I do not immediately see a reason why we couldn't do that. So I will. I'll talk to Reese, who would probably be the best person to talk to about this,
Rampant hype. Let's
and
go.
like see if there's any reason why we can't just implement that.
Well,
Sure,
hot damn, I'm
why
glad
not?
I asked this question.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
Whoa.
For sure. It honestly had not been. I had not connected pausing and hardcore death as like lag spikes as a thing yet in my mind. So that connection was very good of you to point out.
And
some
the
people are
person- the
pointing
random
out
person
to
in chat too.
Yeah, for sure.
6-second timer as an impossible to fix issue. It seems
Yeah, another
like,
one.
but
There you go.
apparently,
Taking them out.
maybe.
Sure.
So I still had some other questions about the pause thing. You mentioned in
Yeah.
like one of the previous interviews the idea of
Yeah.
like being able to look at debuffs and things like that
Yes,
that's
yes.
on your character and
Yeah.
how that's difficult to do in current PoE. Can you do that while paused?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Um,
So yep, you'll
Amazing.
be able to mouse over.
You'll be
I
able
can
to look at
pause in
your
the boss fight and look at the
character sheet and-
mechanics.
Yeah, look at your
Mm.
skills and see what your skill is currently, what its current DPS is in that exact frame. You
Ah,
and
that's
definitely
things like
won't.
that.
so good for testing.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
you won't be able to change your gear and passives out
Yeah.
mid
Fair.
battle.
Yeah.
that
yeah,
would
but
be
you can
pretty
inspect-
degenerate.
But the intention is that you can inspect your character and various things that you want to do.
Yeah, so
while
you can open
paused,
up your
which is-
character screen and
Yeah,
Oh.
handy.
things like that and skill info. Okay, great. So what happens if you get like a trade message or something like that? Can you like chat with other people while paused?
You can chat while paused. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Ooh.
like queue up a trade, like pause and discuss a trade because that's like a annoying
Yeah,
thing to
yeah,
trade
sure.
right
Why
now.
not? No reason
Yeah.
why not. Yeah, like
Sick.
all non-combat and like all non-game simulation packets. Well, to be technical about it, still work while paused. So there is no reason you can't do any of the things that are outside the like game simulation
Nice.
while you're
That's an
paused.
amazing
Except
trade
for
quality of
parties
life.
and all those other
Yeah.
and all those
Yeah.
other things like
Because
that.
right now, like being in the middle of a boss fight or
Okay.
something, you're like trying to type to someone like,
Yeah,
"Give me
yeah,
that, I'm in
yeah,
a boss
for sure,
fight," and you
sure,
like send it to the wrong person.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Press escape and take our time.
Yeah, you'll still have to like open the portal to get out of the boss fight. So if you
Sure,
like,
yeah, that's fine.
die when trying to open the portal and fail to make that trade, that's on you. But
So
Awesome.
is pausing restricted to? Because you said that obviously you can't do it in like group play, but if the players are in the same party but they're not in the same instance, can you still use the pause?
Yeah, of course.
And then what happens if somebody? You could.
Yeah.
So then
if
what
someone-
happens if the game is paused?
Now, what happens when someone joins the area while you're paused?
I think
Exactly.
The
the-
area
Um,
unresumed. And this is important to know because if you're in a party, you are in danger of someone unpausing you. So you just have to be
Yes.
aware
Yeah.
of that, right? Like you have to be aware of that.
Okay, so that's
There's
just
a
something
thing to know.
that's gonna work like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In fact,
wow.
I believe we even discussed this, although I don't believe I told any of the UI guys to actually do it. But I remember at the time we discussed putting a warning on the screen when you're paused in party that says,
Right.
warning, you could be unpaused by another player, just so you know that, like,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
yeah, I think
PK
one of the UIs to
time,
actually add that. I remember when we were
That's
discussing
brutal.
pause originally, that did come up as a thing that we had to make sure was on the screen, just so you know, like, you know, you're in danger of someone else. Because the other thing as well, by the way, maybe something I don't know if we even mentioned before is you can pause in party play if everyone pauses. Like if everyone pushes escape, it pauses.
Oh,
Oh,
So you actually can, but the thing is, that's the other case where it would be a warning on the screen if you could be unpaused at any time because another
Yeah.
party.
Anyone
You
who
could do
pauses, it pauses for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah. But you actually can pause in party play if that's the case also.
Oh, great.
does it like
Oh, very
prompt
useful.
a pause vote or?
It's not
No,
a
you just
vote.
pause.
Once everyone is paused, the game is paused.
Yeah, so there'll be like a thing that says
Oh,
so and so
okay.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
Like that,
paused or
okay.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, so if everyone does that, it just
yeah. That's what voice comes
Oh,
for.
and,
right?
and,
Oh,
and
okay.
game auto pauses when you like do things that cover the whole screen, like open the passive screen and things like that. Will auto vote for pause, if you will. I mean, like you are considered to be I want to pause when those screens are open. And so then if everyone is looking at passives, then yes, the game will be paused.
Cool.
Or pushing escape or whatever.
Wow.
It is. So
Oh, that's so good for like co-op play with like a new player or something. Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you're like, I want to go to the bathroom, you can.
I'm so
you know,
amped.
as long as you trust
What
your
the-
friend, as
yeah,
long as you
Oh
trust
my
your
God.
friend, then you can go do that when you're in party
it's
play.
amazing.
Sick. All right.
I look forward
anyone...
to the rip clips.
Yes, the PK ones. All right. Did anyone have any follow-up questions on that before we move on to Rise's next question? Go ahead, Rise.
Is it the really long one?
Yeah,
Is
do
that
it.
one? Oh,
Grace.
this was mostly answered already. It was
Yeah.
about the items and the general concern about having to, instead of clicking a Chaos Orb 1,000 times, picking up 1,000 items or 500 items and clicking a Chaos Orb 500 times.
Oh, we can go to the next one then. All right, skip Rise. Noogie.
Skip me.
Well, so you've designed 40 leagues or so far, a little bit more, I think. What are some
Very
of the
good enough.
learnings you're bringing forward to PoE, and can we expect, like, what can we expect?
It's honestly really hard to answer this question because there's like a million small lessons all the time.
Yeah.
But I think like the overall formula of leagues that we've had, I think it is good. And what I guess that formula is kind of things like, okay, first of all, it needs to affect the game from the start. Which, like, you know, like commonly it can't just be something that happens at end game. You need to have some kind of meta progression system. You need to have something that changes up combat. You need to have some kind of storyline element. You need to have a thing that affects crafting, like some item acquisition in some manner, like that. You know, there's items you couldn't make before. Is that the whole? I feel like there's at least two more things on that list that I didn't mention. But like, there's the list of things that we have to checkbox that a league has for it to actually be a compelling piece of content. And those, I guess, were sort of developed over the years, you know, to understand how to do a league. So that's obviously really important. But I mean, there's just a million tiny learnings. I'm sure you could rattle off a few
Yeah, I mean,
random things.
The fact is that a lot of it we're not thinking about. We're just like, oh yeah, we've known from past experiences it doesn't work, so we don't even bring up the possibility of that mechanic or something like that.
Right. You know, and sometimes there are things we will forget from time to time that we learn again. You know, like I think I mentioned already, the one where we making sure that you always have to earn difficulty. Like, you know, like you can't give the player difficulty for free, like because it leads to issues. Like, you know, we had to learn painfully again in the current league. So things like that are like lessons that like are less obvious, but like we kind of get there. But yeah, like sometimes it's easy to forget some of those lessons with so many expansions. It's like, oh crap, we made this mistake that we made in the past, and like we somehow managed to noob into it again. You know, like that kind of stuff will happen from time to time, of course. But you know, ideally we've learned our lessons from what we've done.
Have you considered at all diverging from the script and maybe going for something completely different with a league? So, I mean, for instance, maybe have something that's not as connected. Because a lot of people have been asking in the past for having a completely separate thing to mapping, for instance, where it doesn't,
Right.
like, where it literally goes a different way.
Right. I mean, we've done that occasionally. Like, I mean, I guess you'd say Delve was kind of one of those type of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we do occasionally, but I will say that it is a lot harder to make that kind of content when you have to do it completely from scratch without any kind of base to work from. So that just makes it a little bit harder. But I mean, you know, like we like to try and do different things all the time, ideally. So yeah, there are hopefully, you know, it's funny. I think actually that PoE 2's development has actually reduced the amount of that we've been able to do in PoE 1 because, like, the environment team is very much busy, you know, and so like during PoE 2's development, we've had less of that stuff, honestly, than what we have had in the past. So once we're no longer kind of doing that, I think it will be easier to have more of those kind of larger, like, you know, like
Cool.
do a league that has a whole environment thing going on, and you know, like that will be easier to do at that point.
I mean, yeah, the stuff that we have done for like new environments and stuff for the PoE 1 leagues has been very clever use of PoE 1 PoE 2.
In some cases, you know, it's funny because actually, like PoE 2 has been in development for so long now that we have assets that are old in PoE 2 that we're replacing, and then we can use those assets in PoE 1.
Like hand-me-down clothing.
Yeah, like it's kind of sad. It's like, oh yeah, this is too old for PoE 2 now. We need to, like, we can use this in PoE 1. It's kind of, oh my goodness, yeah. It's like, I feel like we get into Duke Nukem Forever territory at this point, but like, it's been a long road for sure. Yeah.
Are you still planning on having like the 3 to 4 month league cycle? And has that proven to be practical? I noticed we've gone to 4 months a lot lately.
Yeah, you know, I feel sad about that because really we still want it to be 3 months, but just
Okay.
once again, it's just been, it's like getting PoE 2 across the line has just meant that some 4-month ones have kind of snuck in there. And I expect and have no reason to not believe that once we get PoE 2 out, that both PoE 1 and 2 will both have 3-month expansions going forward from that point onwards. 3 months
Nice.
is the optimal amount of time we have discovered. So you know, like any shorter and it feels like too much, any longer and it's and we're leaving like for lack of a better, well, it is really money, I suppose. At the end of the day, leaving money on the table because like having more expansions in here directly translates to to more players and more money, right? Like
Sure.
at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? So like, if you really get down to it, then sure, yeah, like 3 months is the optimal amount of time we've found for doing that stuff.
And you're planning on alternating the league cycles between the two games?
Well, as we said, we're going to do a 3 month cycle for both.
Yeah.
So like it's 1 month between a PoE 1 to PoE 2, and then 2 months from PoE 2 to PoE 1.
Gotcha.
We don't necessarily
makes
expect everyone
sense.
to play both games. I mean, there will be people who have an appetite for a lot, and those people will be able to play both. But I think there will certainly be people for whom they just play one or the other, and that's fine too. And we want to make sure that if you're one of those players, like we wouldn't want it so that so what you were suggesting there maybe was that it's like 3 months. Like so that would
No, I meant
if
like
it was
1 or 2
3
months.
for each one, then that would mean that
staggered.
you'd have 6 months between a PoE 2 a league and the next, and that would be too
Yeah.
long for people who just play that one game. So we do have to actually have both.
Yeah, no, I figured they'd just be slotted in between each other in terms
Yeah,
of their
slot it in
release
between each
cycle.
other so that we don't so they don't overlap.
Yeah, great. So changing topics a little bit, a super interesting thing I learned about at ExileCon from chatting with some devs, which I don't know has been talked about that much, but is pushiness in Path of Exile 2's combat, this
Right,
concept.
right.
So the idea that different characters, enemies, and skills have different weights, and
Yes,
they can
yes.
allow them to push entities out of the way, or even like push them into walls and stuff like that was being
Yeah,
discussed.
yeah. So
How that affects
Go on.
content, and any updates on that?
I guess there's not really much changed about it, but ultimately, yeah, like in case people don't know about it, in PoE 2 we made it so that everything every monster has a pushiness value, which is the degree to which they can push other things apart, and things that have lower pushiness get pushed by things that have higher, and there's like various ranges and things around that, and all skills also have this, and all movements have this as well, attacks and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interacted with some other things, like, for example, knockback now has more of a sort of compounding thing, while lots of little pellets that have a little bit of knockback will combine into a big one that can hit a monster. And if that's a big monster, it'll be knocked back less, but that monster can then push other smaller monsters that's affected by its pushiness after
Yeah,
it's
there's
been
all
knocked
sorts of
back,
stuff going
so-
on here. Like, and I think that there's a few different levels of it as well. Like, you can, normal pushing, will, like, there are different levels of like, okay, so sometimes when you push something, it can be pushed into other things, but won't continue to push those things further. And then in other cases, you can pack whole groups of monsters right up against a wall so that they don't. But we're trying to avoid all cases of intersection. Like, we never, like in PoE 1, intersection happens a lot more, and I really hate that stuff because it means that it makes the world not feel solid, and things can go through each other. And so in PoE 2, part of the reason the system exists is because I was determined that we will not have a game where things penetrate each other as a matter of course. I mean, there are still some cases where that can happen, but in general, things don't intersect. They push each other out of the way, and like everything feels consistent. And so yeah, that makes it feel feel a lot better.
This whole conversation that I had at ExileCon came up because I was talking about one of the big issues I felt with the demos was body blocking and the lack of ability to be able to maneuver around that. And I assume phasing is probably gone in PoE 2, right? Like, I don't imagine that's a big thing. So then the idea is that will like the player be able to effectively walk through very small, low pushiness value mobs, or maybe use abilities to move them out of the way to be able to do that?
If the monster is small, then so most player abilities
First
have
out to
movement in
kill
them
it.
increase your pushiness value a bit, and that is so that yes, you can push small mobs aside as you're doing those kinds of abilities. And that can vary based on the skill. Rory probably has more like,
Yeah,
like
I mean,
specifics.
a lot of different builds have different tools in their toolkit to escape those surrounded situations by either getting bonus pushiness, but many of them have a situation where like 3 really large monsters surrounding you are just going to block you in, and you have to find a clever way to.
You do have to actually be able, like, you do have to think about, like, are there too many monsters here for me to be able to handle? Like, that should be a thing, and the blocking is
goal,
part
right?
of that. Like, I don't know if the hyena fight.
Yeah,
the demo,
that was a good example.
yes, but the thing is, that one was intentional. Like, I wanted people when they played that to be like, "Oh, Jesus!" Like when the hyenas come, like I was like, I want the reaction to be like, "That's way too many hyenas." So that's kind of like a fun element of that. But one thing that you might not have been aware of in that fight is you technically can control the number of hyenas because they build up slowly over time, and there's a way to make them come early so that they don't overwhelm you, and there's like there's actually mechanics around that a little bit in that fight as a thing, by the way. But,
It's also like that specific character that was playing in that fight had like one tool that they could maybe get out of the situation with.
that was
yeah,
the
that's
issue.
true. That's true. That's
Characters
true.
would have
That's
different
true.
options, and
Yeah, yeah.
maybe if you were playing the Huntress, you might have picked a different skill that would get you out in a
true.
more convenient way.
Yeah, yeah. But I agree. There needs to be tools to be able to deal with those kinds of problems. But I also want to make sure that intersection is not the solution. Like, I just don't like intersecting very much, and yeah, like most like any kind of game that you would consider an action game, I would say does not have things that intersect with each other. Like that's just not a thing that good actions games have. So therefore, we need to solve that problem as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is pretty interesting in terms of design space because it allows you to do something like a Huntress who's a bit more like lithe and graceful, can jump over monsters, whereas someone who's like one of the brutes could effectively just toss them out of the way or push through them.
Exactly.
So
And the other thing as well is that player size, like in fact, wait, did we do the thing in the end where we reduced player size during the like the dashes, like for Killing Palm?
No, it's more that the player is pushier than their size would normally imply.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
the dodge
So-
roll, was it?
No, the dash. So we're talking like Killing Palm, where you
Okay,
where you get
yep.
to the cull and then
Ah.
thing, right? So there's things like that. Like there's tweaks we had to do to kind of make it feel right, so that you can because you can get through spaces with a skill like that because they're pathfinding that you don't feel like you'd normally be able to get through. Like you just kind of squeeze through and it kind of looks okay. So yeah, it sort of works.
That really fits like the monk aesthetic and everything. I think one of the issues that maybe cropped up in the demos was that the dodge roll didn't seem to have any pushiness, which meant in that high inner fight people were just rolling in place, which A looks a bit dumb and I think B felt really awkward. Is that something you're looking at?
I don't know.
It's a tricky one because you don't want
Yes.
dodge roll to be like just get out of most situations without
Right,
any
sure.
threat. Like,
But the
because
thing
it's
that there are
weaknesses.
two things I want to say about that though that
Mm-hmm.
matter, and one of them is that you melee there's you don't get hit by melee attacks while you're dodge rolling for at least for most of the time of it, and at XLCon we still had that stunning issue where you were getting stunned by small attacks way too much, that one changed the feel quite a bit from when you were playing because I know that was a big issue for you for sure.
Yeah.
So that stunning thing did make quite a big difference, and so like the XLCon build in particular was too hard for that reason. It would sort of be interesting actually to get you to play again now with that change and see whether you feel the same way.
Okay.
We'll have to look into that later on. But I can. We might be able to sort that out. But it'd be interesting to see whether you see the same because I do agree that like it was too much there for sure. Like we need to improve that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll play,
Yeah,
sure.
There's definitely a thing of you feel like you should dodge roll in some situations where you are better standing your ground and attacking, and I
Yep.
don't know whether that's a thing like you just get the hang of it
Right.
over
But
time.
you do also need like so there's this feeling of stickiness a little bit where you stick to the monsters a little bit that you need to have a little bit of.
Mm-hmm.
And the stickiness is caused by the stuns that you receive, where effectively like because that's how you know that you went in too deep. And so there's that little just bit of feeling of crap, the monsters have kind of got me.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then it just feels like you just walk past them like ghosts and they don't matter.
Yeah.
Like it's funny because in like Baldur's Gate 3 for the D&D system, they've got the whole attack of opportunity thing
Yeah.
that they use to solve that problem. But you need some way to make it so like in order to make it so that there's the feeling of kind of the front line of combat and kind of where you have some kind of element of like not feeling like there's a bit of danger when you get close to the monsters. You need some kind of way to make it so that
it's super important, and like I agree with that, and that's why I was like really excited to hear about the pushiness system because it seems like a big solution to a lot of the issues with that, and actually
you need
enhances
skills
that.
to do that.
Yeah, like it creates the front line when you're like effectively pushing the monsters back a bit and pushing them aside and maneuvering them. Yeah, it's very exciting. All right, so we're kind of in a bit more of a free-for-all section. If Noogie or Rise, you want to jump in with some final questions you might have. I also have some more community questions to round us out as well. Did you guys have anything you want to bring up first, though?
Well, to follow on this little note here, stun and pushiness. So like pushiness is just the monsters and blocking you in and all that, right? Like, does it have any relation to actual stun, and how do you solve that? Because
No, it doesn't. So you can push monsters aside and they don't get stunned. And while so actually the other thing, so while you are being moved, you cannot pathfind, but you can initiate actions.
Okay.
That I believe.
which means that you could do a spinning attack that sends you forward on the monk, and while you're being pushed, you won't start moving. But as soon as that push ends, you'll continue on with the movement and whirl out of that situation.
So for monsters, what it means is that like the monsters aren't stunned; they're still attacking you as they're being pushed forward, unless you stun them, of course, with the attack you're doing. But they can't move into range of something else. But because when you're pushing them, you are in range of them. Usually, they can attack you during that time. So that's kind of how that is.
Okay.
And do you like how stun currently works? Because if you're given tools to get out of the way or to roll out, it's stun is one of those things in PoE that can be the most frustrating to deal with, right? To the point where you have to become immune.
Well, I would hope that you don't feel like you have to become immune, but it is something you need to be considering for sure as a player, right? Like it is like that
Because
will...
especially with like cooldowns, if you ever get stunned, it sets it on cooldown, but you never actually got to cast it.
Oh, actually,
Ah?
well, hang on, no. So mana costs are changing in this regard.
Yeah, mana costs are changing, so they're over time. So if you get stunned,
Yes, if you get
performance
stunned, you
goes
don't pay the full mana cost. You only pay the part damage. But then for cooldowns,
I mean, we did for like the power charge spending skills. We made it they don't spend the charge until the moment
yes, we
the
did.
skill.
And there's
starts
other,
to-
Okay.
That's cool.
like there might be more around
Interesting.
cooldowns we
I
can
mean,
think about.
we don't have a lot of cooldown skills that we've
Yes,
made
you're
at
right.
the moment.
You are
so
right.
Probably
There-
not.
there's not a lot of cooldown skills,
Okay.
but like maybe we could consider moving the cooldown take until after a certain critical point in the animation or something like that. Like there are things like that we can potentially
I
consider
think
doing.
one of the skills we had, there was a long cooldown skill. We just made you stun immune for that brief period before it goes off. But with all of these things, we look at the skill for like what the skill should do to avoid that situation.
But I appreciate that. And the mana cost thing was actually done specifically for that issue because yes, you can spend a huge amount of mana and then fail, and that sort of sucked.
Yeah.
So like we appreciate that issue as an issue. But at the same
Right,
time,
okay.
we don't want to be solving this problem by like reducing the importance of stunning. No, like stunning should be important. That's an important
Right.
consideration.
I mean, yeah, in PoE2, stun is far less chance based, far more like size of the hit against you based. So
Right.
small hits are only if they're like completely surrounded. Do the small hits even really have a chance of stunning you at all?
Right.
So there's a lot of
Except for when we had that bug at XLCon. yeah.
Don't worry about that. Raz, did you have a question
Have you
about...
maybe?
No, go ahead.
Oh, just another follow up on the stun.
Yeah.
Have you maybe considered a system in which you have a way to respond? So, for instance, I think a lot of Path of Exile 2's design, in terms of gameplay, works similarly, ideologically at least, to Diablo 2, where you have tools to deal with something in a certain fight, and you're clicking the correct button to deal with that in that immediate moment. So if you need to get away, you can get away. If you need to deal damage, you deal damage. If you need to debuff, you debuff. Those tools are always available. But when it comes to stuns, it's really never a system that feels rewarding, because currently in Path of Exile 1, if you just get stunned, you're just dead. You can't move, you die. That's how the game works. But have you thought about a system in which in PoE 2 you can just, for instance, you get knocked down and then you press a button to recover from that, allowing
To
player
get back
to have
up, yeah.
any sort of response to what's happening in that way, other than just standing still and losing control of your character, which really never feels satisfying.
I mean, at least at the moment, the stun duration is short enough that it's shorter than most people's reaction times. So reacting to a
Okay.
stun is almost impossible.
Right. But also the oh, damn, I had a thing in mind and then it fell out of my head. So
I mean, we have the thing of also
Sorry,
every
I
time
took
you
too
get
long.
stunned, you get a higher threshold for the next stun, so it
Yes.
takes longer for the next stun to
Yeah,
occur
that's
on
cool.
you and so on.
that
Right.
is
So
true. And
There's
yeah.
stuff there, but yeah, you can still have that situation of that 300 milliseconds is all it takes for you to.
Oh yeah, that's
be
right. I
put
remember what I was
in
going
place
to say
with
now.
that.
So the time to kill stuff does matter for this because, like,
Yeah.
by extending that a little bit, it means that the stun
Yeah.
is going to be less of an issue there. So, like that, I think that that can also be a help to that. Yeah.
Yeah, we do expect, especially like a strength character, has more investment in increasing their stun threshold. It's just nature of how you build your character. You'll often just want more stun threshold to make it less likely to be a threat of
Right.
like medium-sized hits stunning you,
Mhm.
that sort of stuff.
All right. We're going to blast through a few remaining questions. Rise or Nig, if you have anything you want to jump in for, go ahead though. Someone in chat kind of brought up an interesting idea that the crafting system currency changes, like the Chaos Orb especially. That seems like it would have an impact on maps and map rolling.
It probably will.
Something that's been
Probably will,
discussed.
I agree. I don't know if there's much to say about that, but yes,
Yeah.
it'll have an impact on it.
That'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how you explore that. Do you have a reveal roadmap for what's coming up in the future?
Not one that's public, but we
Yeah.
will be talking a lot about PoE 2 during this year. I mean, obviously it's the launch year. There'll be a huge amount of stuff going on. There's quite a bit. There's quite a bit to talk about still. So yeah. I mean, you should expect them to come relatively quickly from this point onwards.
Yeah, awesome. Rise, did you have a question you want to jump in, mate? Or Noogie, go
I have an artsy question.
Ooh.
We
I have
understand that
just to follow up
most-
on that.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so just to
Yeah, go-
follow up on that, do you have any? So you don't need to spot, but I'm more thinking about ambition. So in PoE 1, I remember how you were talking about Act 10. We're gonna keep going for 10 years. What are your current thoughts of PoE's
aspirations.
future?
I see no reason it wouldn't last as long as PoE 1 has until now, at least, right? Like, why not?
Another 10 years, let's go.
Yeah, let's absolutely, right? Why not?
Hell yeah. Amazing.
Of course, like we're a long-term game. That's kind of the thing, right?
Rise?
All right, I'm asking the artsy question
Do it.
now. This one's going to be tough. We understand that most microtransactions from PoE 1 will be transferable to PoE 2. You guys have talked about that quite a lot. A lot of people's concerns is how this impacts the game's immersion and aesthetic, particularly in towns and in the general interaction with other players. How do you think these elements from the first game will blend with the new world and atmosphere of PoE 2 without disrupting its unique feel and design?
Oh, it's kind of just unfortunately the case that it will affect it, right? Like, I mean, there's not a lot we can do about that. I think that the decision to make the monetization the same across both games was much more of an important and like player positive thing to do
Yeah, for
than
sure.
the downside of that. And ultimately, like microtransactions being what we sell, like, people wanting shiny, flashy things, like that's going to be how it is. And I think that over time, like obviously we've got older stuff that doesn't look as good, but people tend to wear newer stuff anyway. So I don't think it'll be like, I don't think like old stuff looking bad will be that common occurrence for the most part. But yeah, obviously it can happen. I actually a couple of days ago was looking at some PoE 1 microtransactions, what they look like in PoE 2. It's kind of interesting. And it's like, you look at them and you're kind of like, okay, well, yeah, like this thing on the screen looks worse than the other stuff on the screen for sure, right? But I mean, it is what it is. Like, it's
I mean, it still
that's what it looks like. What it looked like when you bought it.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the reality of that.
it's still got like nicer lighting and stuff on
I mean,
it, but you can only do so much.
I mean, it's sort of interesting though, because there's nicer lighting in the area, but it's still in like it depends on what era it's from. Because if it's from before the PBR, this is physically based rendering era, then some of the stuff the lighting can look a bit funky on. Like, I mean, it still works, but it's like it certainly doesn't look as nice as what the new stuff looks like. But for anything that's like, what was it, about 5 years ago maybe when we started PBR, or maybe 4, like I can't remember, but anything post that era looks a lot nicer in the lighting of PoE 2 for sure, just because it's using the new lighting stuff that we did.
Damn.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, we've got some micros that we sold in 2012. It's like 2011 even, I guess. Those things don't look as good as modern stuff for sure.
Garena Pet and Razor Footprints.
Excuse me, I want the Razor Footprints. I regret missing out.
Yeah, for sure. But geez, yeah, the other day, there was the most ridiculous thing. Someone used that Garena Pet as a stand-in for one of the skills on the Bog Witch. Like, it was the skill that had fire, like it was like a fire trail line, and like this Garena Pet just went screaming across the screen with the like fire coming out of its ass. Like, and I saw it and I was just like, what the hell was that? Like, I haven't seen this thing in like 10 years. Like, it was just like, actually, it was the most ridiculous moment. Yeah, I was like,
Amazing.
Perfect.
yeah. I think I've got a screenshot of it somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it up. It was like the most absurd thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
Like that's one of the good elements of PoE 1
Nice.
that benefits PoE 2.
Yeah.
Where possible, will stash tabs also carry over to PoE 2?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I imagine some of them might not, like if the thing doesn't exist in PoE 2.
I mean, I don't know if there's anything that like there's a stash tab. I mean, they might have to change a bit, but like I don't think there's anything as a stash tab for that's going to be like straight up removed.
Well,
at
you were
least
undecided on
longer
divination
term.
cards last I heard, right?
Well, oh sure, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
there's that. I guess. We'd need to- yeah, yeah, but I mean, like, sure, like there might be a few things like that, and
Essences, maybe. I could see them not being
well, I
in
mean,
PoE2.
I'm sure we will have those eventually.
Okay.
So it might be that the stash tab is not there when you first come in, but then when they get added, then
Oh,
they come
yeah.
in.
Oh,
You know,
that's
that
cool.
kind of thing could happen. But
Okay.
yeah,
I got to applaud that carrying over. That's awesome.
right.
So will PoE2 move away from the current wealth of splinters, fragments, and shards, or do you see that as a non-issue?
I guess I don't see that as a well. I mean, ultimately, there are two things, right? One of them is we want to have a variety of in-game content to do, and two, we prefer it when those things are tradable. Like because the alternative to that is like some counter on your character that you can't trade. I guess.
Yeah.
Like you need to have some form of item that's going to give you grant you access to the end game stuff. If we want to have a variety of in-game things, then that means you're going to have a variety of various like keys to enter those things that you can build up to. So it's just kind of how it is, I guess. Like you know, those things build up, yeah, but yeah, as I said, kind of how it is.
All right. Do you, Razanugi, have any final questions come to mind?
I just have a follow-up, I guess,
Yeah.
because we never got an answer on we talked about the pickup radius,
Mhm.
but what about the singular button to pick something up from the ground that the console has? Is that ever going to be a possibility? You just press
so, like,
F
pick
and
up
it
all
picks
or
up the thing
something.
that's
I don't know
underneath
if
you.
that's even. I don't. It doesn't feel. I don't have an answer to that really. I have to sort of look into that and think about
Okay.
that one. I don't really have a.
Well, even the one they have in D4, you just use a different button than the mouse button to pick something up. You just allocate it to a different button and you use that. It's actually I was surprised how good that felt sometimes.
I'll look into it.
Hmm.
I'll look into it. All right.
On keybinds, so you're gonna have like a lot of weapon swapping, WSD. How are you gonna manage all those keys that players will eventually have to bind and press?
I just it's hasn't really been a huge issue for us just when playing. Honestly, like it's kind of just been fine. Like
I mean, you don't usually have more than 5 like active using all the time skills, really.
you got stuff you use more rarely that you.
Yeah,
use,
you've got more skill. I mean,
yeah.
some of them are spirit reservations, taking up your gem slots and things like that. Later on, you might put someone on a better gem to trigger rather than doing.
Right. So you
manually
kind of end
that
up
sort of
with it
stuff.
being. It doesn't sort of feel that like it's that wrong as far as like number of things goes. And when if you're using WASD, so that you've kind of got that your hand there, then you've kind of got the left click also that's not move only
Right.
anymore. To be using
Yeah.
as another skill. So you know that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It hasn't kind of ended up being an issue in practice, I think.
Fantastic. Can we expect to see you guys somewhere else soon, or is there some upcoming reveals that people can look forward to?
So we'll have another reveal not too far away. I'm not going to give you the exact date yet. And we also are just doing more like community podcasts and things like that.
Interesting.
You know,
Right.
so we'll be doing one of those every few weeks or so. Yeah, like you know, and it's been a little while since I posted on Reddit because I've been a little bit busy, but I do plan to continue posting on there and doing more stuff. So you know,
I'd say no, that's awesome.
talkative try some more content to make a video about, I guess.
This has been an amazing Q&A. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate
But
it.
yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're engaging with the community as much as we can. Yeah, that's the idea.
It feels like back in the beta days of PoE1.
Well, it should do. Because
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like, you know, like I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, what did we do back then that made us successful? I'm
back.
thinking like, okay,
Yeah.
let's make sure we're doing all that stuff again. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I don't want to leave anything off the table there.
Amazing. Thank you both very much, and thank you everyone for watching and for your questions.
Yeah,
See you fine
thank
folks
you.
later. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, interesting stuff overall. Yeah, a lot of new cool stuff coming up for PoE2, and let me see. They talk about like another interview with Gazi. Oh, it's a 2-hour one. So that happened like before, like earlier. 2 hour, that's 2 hour and a half. That's a lot. I don't know if I can watch it right now, because I'm gonna have to go soon. I guess I'll save it for later. I'll watch it later. There's no timestamp, which is weird. Oh, so the next reveal is the witch, apparently. Like, I'm checking the comments. There is a pinned comments by Gussie on like why they invited them and stuff. So yeah, I'll watch that interview, but later. Right now, I can't. I have stuff to do uh, in real life. I think I'm gonna call it for today. 2 hour stream. Yeah, it's a short stream, but yeah. Sometimes that's how it goes. Anyways, stay safe, stay cool, and I'll see you tomorrow.